This piece of content is brought to you by Micro Center. Go to the links in the description to see their top deals and also check out their new locations that they are opening. And then also this piece of content is brought to you by the Minis Forum X7 Ti mini PC that has an included flexible touchscreen. Use offer code Broken Silicon to save $30 off this fantastic product. And then also use offer code Broken Silicon to save 10% on tasty Vite Ramen, Nano Boost Powder, and other great Vite products. And we'll talk about these sponsors more later. But for now, let's get on with the show. Welcome to Broken Silicon, a gaming hardware podcast. I am your host, Tom, and today I'm joined by somebody who, was on a year ago. I thought it was a great episode. Someone with a ton of experience in the tech reporting industry. But because it's been a year, please reintroduce yourself to this community again. Who are you, and what got you into tech reporting?
I'm Leo Waldock. I've been freelancing for many years, started off in print, moved on to web, now I'm doing videos. I've been freelancing for 8, I think it is, years now for KitGuru. So not quite an employee, but a long-time face. KitGuru is on the web, kitguru.net. We're also on YouTube, KitGuru Tech. And would you believe it? I'm on TikTok, albeit we just clip bits out of our regular videos, just discussing that. I don't work nearly as well vertical as I do wide for some reason. So there we have it. And when you mentioned it's been a year, it has been, but it feels like it was a much shorter period of time in my mind. So there we go. That was Sapphire Rapids, wasn't it?
Yeah, we talked about that a lot.
So that's a year. Intel's had a lot of history in a year.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. It's been 12 months where both in tech and certainly in just world news, it's felt like it happened so quickly. But then if you actually, it's like, oh, wow, that was a quick year. But then you also go, wow, actually, when I add up everything that happened, that felt like a decade.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I actually wanted to start with is this. Benjamin Oshley writes in and says, hey, Leo, always wonderful to have you on the show. My question is less about the tech and more the community around it. Do you have any thoughts on AnandTech shutting down and perhaps the health and future of tech media in general?
Yes, I've known AnandTech for years. Were they going for 27 since Anand? I never knew Anand himself, but I've known a number of people working at AnandTech over the years, including Dr. Ian Cuttress and Gav Bonshaw and others. Very well respected title. In a sense, their end was coming predictably for a while. The question was how quick it was going to arrive, to my mind, because they are web only, didn't do video, which at some point is going to be the kiss of death, and they are a stablemate to Tom's Hardware. And at some point, a publisher is going to look at how the sites are doing, and they're going to kill one. And
so they're both owned by the same company?
I could be wrong. I believe they are both owned by Future. They've all been through different hands, not least Tom's. But I believe that AnandTech was owned by someone like Perch a little while ago and was then sold on to Future. But all these titles go round and round. I myself, years ago, worked for a title called PC Direct for a very short time, just after it had changed hands. And it turned out I was working for one title that was part of a portfolio of 5 that had been sold by one publisher to another publisher, and they'd always intended to close 2 of the titles and try and get the audience to, go to 3 magazines rather than 5. That was their stated plan. Just the staff didn't know that.
So you think that's intentional? You think when these companies buy up a bunch of these websites, they're just waiting to see which one they get rid of? Like they know they're going to?
They may have a plan already. It could be something as simple as Tom's Hardware. I mean, even though it was set up by a guy called Tom Pabst, who was either Austrian or German, I forget which, and living in Britain at the time and a doctor. But Tom's Hardware, it's a great name. Whereas AnandTech is maybe slightly trickier to kind of get across as a URL. But neither title does video. Always ever going to do video. And you got that funny thing going on where if you're doing pure web, it can be quite cheap. But I shouldn't think the way AnandTech was doing their work was cheap because it was so in depth, which is why we all appreciated it, of course. And then you've got the thing which is, where does their money come from? And when Ian Cuttress left, whenever that was now, a couple of years ago, at the time I seem to recall him saying something like he was sick and tired of doing Black Friday specials, as in what are the 10 deals you can pick up, that kind of thing. Because, of course, they want revenue. They have to have revenue. The question is where it comes from. It's either from Patreons or from merch or adverts on the page or whatever. The money has to come from somewhere. We don't do this for free. But of course, when people set things up, as I'm sure I don't need to tell you, when you set a thing up in the very first instance, you are doing it. In fact, it probably costs you to do it. And then want to get revenue from somewhere. So that's inevitably where they're going to run into trouble. And without wishing to blight anybody, I've wondered about PC World in San Francisco for the last few years. I wonder if they're getting, but I think they're owned by IDG. I suspect they are the headline title for that publisher. If they had a stablemate, then I think there'd be a fight going on for which one of them gets the chop. So if you're the only title, you'll keep going a while longer. That's how it seems to me. But it's long been the way.
Yeah. I know PC World, though, does quite a few podcasts and videos every week. And it's interesting you bringing up AnandTech not doing video, because that's such an interesting point. I've always thought, like, usually I'll just be honest, like things that pop up, Hardware Unboxed, Gamers Nexus, then maybe I'll flip over to you or Tom's Hardware, and I'm forgetting another one, just to let's round out the opinion on this product. But you put out videos, and not putting out a video, I usually am not the first. You won't be one of the first people I noticed who has reviewed something unless it pops into my YouTube feed, most likely. But every time when I would check AnandTech, I would go, wow, there's 20 pages, of testing here and apps that, I'm just going to be honest, a lot of the people that look at this stuff want to know these rendering apps and frankly, a lot of games, and they tended to focus on the more in-depth professional side of things. And I always was thinking how much time is this taking to do this that I didn't even know they did this test, right? You have to do YouTube. This is a thing that stuck with me so hard. I heard a couple of years ago, the number one search aggregator or whatever is Google. The second most used is YouTube. YouTube, people use it like Google, and that is why it brings in views.
Absolutely correct. The other thing I think is that with AnandTech, people tend to, I think, apart from you obviously got the brand, in that case AnandTech, so you go to the title, people very often follow a particular writer. So in the case of AnandTech, you may have gone to AnandTech for their CPU reviews. Some years ago, I'm going to guess 5, it might be longer, there was a storage guy there called Billy Tallis, who was excellent. And he'd do, as you said, a 20-page review on an SSD controller. It's like, where the hell else are you going to... And I believe he went off to work for Apple, basically to do our research. So, Apple can look at all the SSD controllers. So essentially he's doing AnandTech content, I imagine, if he's still there, for Apple. And so his audience now is Apple rather than us. And he's probably getting paid a load more money and having a great time with it. And God bless him. It's our loss. So, unfortunately, if you're good enough, you get poached by Apple. And there's only so many people someone like AnandTech can lose. So Ian Cuttress is doing his own thing. Gav Bonshaw is a freelancer. So he'll be on the lookout for work. Various others. I don't know what Ryan Smith, the editor, will do. No doubt he'll find somewhere to land. And various others. So, yes, and then you take those 2 or 3 people, and suddenly what's left, is the people. But the people, given the space and the time, and the thing is, if you're to say to those guys, do the best of Black Friday, for example, or 10 reasons why I love TikTok, you won't see them for dust. It'd be like, no, that's not what I signed up for.
No.
To which the publisher will say, presumably, well, what are you doing to make revenue? And then you get that so-called creative tension. Because let's face it, unfortunately, most of us would like to find somebody who'll pay us $100,000 a year to write in-depth reviews of whatever the product is. And then they'll say, I want it tested this way. All the fans drawing air from the top and out the floor or something. It's like, that's stupid. Paying $100,000, I'll do it. Whereas, of course, we're looking for the mass audience. And AnandTech, they did things are past tense their own way, and it worked for the hardcore enthusiast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that, like you said, it's our loss. It's unfortunate, but I mean, so many examples come to mind for me. I remember, like 10 years ago, Usman used to write very good articles for WCCF Tech, if I may say, articles you just don't see there anymore since he has been hired by AMD. And I know, like Colin Moriarty, who used to be like the head of the PlayStation division at IGN, like they left and started his own business, and he can't believe how little IGN was paying him for the amount of work he was doing compared to now. So it just seems to be a pattern.
Yes, quite. I mean, publishers, generally speaking, are utter bastards, and that's just the way of it. And it's the thing people get into it because it's their hobby, it's their enthusiasm. They get access to more things than they had, and then the commercial reality hits, and then it's a question whether you walk and do something else or whether the world changes. In this case, sadly, the world has changed for AnandTech. Great pity.
Yeah. Well, okay. I want to move on to, one of the subjects that undoubtedly I'm sure you knew ahead of time would have to be one of the main things we talked about. And that's the Raptor Lake failures, the saga that's been going on for really the past year, I would argue, and I don't think is over. This is still a developing story. I really want to zoom out and hear when you felt like you started to be hearing about this, how your understanding of the scope of the issues evolved over time, like when it went from this sounds like a problem to, oh, wow, this is huge, and just how you would summarize the situation right now.
Really easy. I knew the scope of it when Wendell told me, and that was during an AMD event in Los Angeles, but a few weeks ago, the Zen 5 tech briefing, which was just about when his video had landed. So I hadn't watched the video, so instead he was talking to me about the details of it. And then he was doing lots of other media with, funny enough, Ian Cuttress and Gamers Nexus and so on. So there's an awful lot, because the day of traveling out there was the day it was all happening. So that's when I knew the scope of it, which was all these. I didn't even know there were game servers running 4900Ks and such like that. Was news to me. The business about is there a problem? It had seemed there was a problem for a little while, but the scope of it was completely news to me. However, KitGuru, particularly James rather than myself, James Dawson, had run into problems with a couple of processors, but this was when he was delidding them and doing direct die cooling and so on and so forth. And as soon as you start doing that kind of stuff, you expect problems. It was quite noticeable to us that it was memory controllers that were failing. You'd lose one channel and then you'd lose both, and then you had a dead processor. We never once saw a dead core. But the funny thing is, I had the same thing happen myself with a regular Core i9 9900K, so 9th gen. And I had a memory channel die on that.
I have a Raptor Lake i7 that's had issues with memory controller since it came out. Yeah. Like, this is a thing.
Yeah, exactly. It seems to be an early indication. Whereas weirdly, I've never had a problem with instability, which is what many people seem to be running into. But possibly that's because I always run stupidly over the top cooling. So it could be that. And I always run good memory, and I always run a good power supply. So that's kind of taking those out of the equation, and you're left with very few parts that could be the problem. But I think I said this to you possibly last time I was on, I didn't review the 14th gen processors. I did them as part of a roundup when I looked at some Gigabyte Z790 motherboards, which might even be over my shoulder. And the reason I didn't review the processors was because they were the same as the 13th gen processors. And I was fairly over Intel with 13th gen because the power was just bloody stupid. And the thing is, it's become a shorthand in conversation, mentioning James Dawson again. James tends to do KitGuru's cooler testing. He also does case reviews, and he does a lot of custom loop cooling stuff. And the 4095 watt setting has become shorthand for unlimited. So when you go in the BIOS and you have a PL1, PL2 power limits, i.e. boost and sustained, and a number of BIOS writers will put in their type of cooler installed, and they'll say like box cooler, big air cooler, or all in one, or custom loop. And that gives them the cue they need for how much power can they stick in your processor. And the thing is, anything above really tiddly little air cooler, they'll stick in massive power. And the typical figure is 4095, which I guess is a power of 2 thing. So 2 to the whatever the heck that is, 2 to a lot.
4096 then probably.
Well, yes, but it starts at 0, not at 1.
Okay.
So it's 2 to the power of -1. But it's ludicrous because these processors, so the 13900 and 1400 KS can run at 350 watts, I think, from memory, i.e. on proper
and I
cooling.
think I saw some people get it to run 450 watts, yeah.
Right, which is just nuts. And I got sick and tired of it. The default setting was 253 watts. And then we ran into all the business of Intel talking about, what were the wordings they used? Because you've been over this. It wasn't stock settings, was it? It was like default power scheme or some such shadiness. And that meant a number of different things. I mean, I know it's made Steve of Gamers Nexus blood boil with what the hell are you actually saying we should actually do?
Well, I don't think they really know. To this day, I'm still not sure they really know.
Well, I was in conversation with my reps at Intel when I was getting ready for Zen 5, which in turn was delayed a couple of weeks, and I know Zen 5 is on the list of topics. So that would be August. And I knew I'd be testing Intel processors, and I knew I'd be waiting for my AMD samples. So I thought, well, let's test the Intel processors up front. So I tried to get hold of the Intel reps to ask them what settings I should use to test the Intel processors. And I couldn't get an answer. And they knew this was not just like idle chit-chat. This was to go into my reviews. And the reason they couldn't answer was because this microcode update, they were expecting at that point, late September, I think, or during September.
Like mid-September, I think. I think it started rolling out fairly early.
We're recording this on the 1st of September just to get the historical perspective correct.
I meant to say August, like when the updates started coming
out. No. They were telling me initially September.
Oh, I see.
No, that's my point. In other words, and they're only passing on what they've been told, and they were couching it very much in terms of I understand and I believe. But it was basically, when this thing eventually arrives, we'll let you know. Until that point, which I said, but you do understand that this is after the launch, to which they're essentially saying, well, what can I do? And I could see that. So I believe I tested the i9 and the i7 on 253 watts and the i5 on less. Can't remember what the figures were, 180. And the thing is, 180 watts for a Core i5 is still far too much.
Yeah.
I mean, I hate it. And the thing is that I used to use Intel processors on my own PCs, but I was using the high-end desktop parts, X99, X299 platforms. Because they're essentially Xeons, so they're much physically larger than desktop processors. And then I switched over to AMD, went Threadripper, and then Zen 3, Ryzen 9 5950X, when Zen 4 launched, because I wanted cool and quiet. And I bought it cheap, DDR4. I'm still running it now, it's DDR4. So it's a cheap processor, DDR4, and the thing runs at 60 Celsius. Which is, I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit. It's not much though. And that's the thing. So I had no warning that Intel was running into major dramas. It just felt wrong. And the thing is, if you calculate the area of the dies in these processors and the amount of watts being pumped through them, you're beyond jet engine territory because there's so few square millimeters. It is horrible physics, and they're only doing it to get more clock speed out of it. And I think that's terrible, and it's really bitten them. But where it goes from here, I hate to think. It's going to, because everyone's now, I mean, you guys are talking about class actions, and I can understand why. There have been class actions over far less. Yeah. And the thing is, it was a few years ago now, when we're all talking about, is Intel in trouble? No, they'll be fine. And now you think to yourself, could finish the company off potentially. It's a terrible state of affairs.
Yeah, from what I can tell then, maybe it wasn't on your radar early simply because you were kind of uninterested in Intel ever since into 13th gen.
It was a very strange thing. So 9th gen, oh god, a history lesson. So when they started banging the extra cores, when the 14 nanometer, they couldn't go to 10 nanometer. So they went from 4 core to 6 core to 8 core. And we were all saying to ourselves, well, they could have done this for years. Why didn't they give us the good stuff? And I suspect a large part of it was, apart from money, was they knew about the thermals of it. The other thing is, and here's a funny thing. So are we agreed that it's Alder Lake is okay, but it's the Raptor Lake? So 12th gen is fine, Alder Lake, which is when they had the hybrid architecture. 13th and 14th gen Raptor Lake is when the wheels fell off.
So my summary of kind of what's going on, and when I started actually hearing about these issues, was actually late last year, when, or maybe even before late last year, where, I've some sources in retail, and some of them, that work at larger places like Best Buy or Micro Center, Amazon. Some of them, they're just mom and pop versions of Micro Centers, and some system integrators too. Maybe staff of 10 to 100 people, but might sell 1,000 desktops a month or something. So they're working every day building these desktops, and I'll be talking to these people for all sorts of reasons. Like, hey, is AMD hinted when RDNA 3 is coming out? Hey, is there this? But then I would consistently hear late last year, hey, by the way, just FYI, we're getting double the failures of Intel right now that we were getting before. I remember one person specifically I talked to, I asked, well, how does it compare to the previous gens? And they said, honestly, most of 14 nanometer was fine, but Comet Lake and Rocket Lake definitely had higher failure rates, but not like double, but they were higher, probably because of how much energy is pumped into them. And then failure rates plummeted with Alder Lake. It was not as, maybe a little higher than AMD, but it worked. And then with Raptor Lake, they were getting failures after months. And this is kind of what you hear.
You're a good man with the names of the cores. I know you love your Monts and your Coves.
Yeah, for some reason, I have this weird ability to remember most of them.
Yes. Yeah. So in Raptor Lake, the core was Raptor core, wasn't it?
Yes, which is just Golden Cove. Raptor Cove is Golden Cove with more cache, and a few other tweaks.
Here's the thing. So if you think back to, Raptor Lake was 13th gen, the first go round, because the reason 14th gen's the same blooming thing. When they did 13th gen, I was doing a tech tour with Intel to Israel, and we went to the fab and Kiryat Gat and such like. And then they were talking about Raptor Lake. And the thing was, we'd fully expected that Raptor Lake would be nothing special. And they were talking about it, and they're talking a really big game, like it's going to be a big leap on. And we're saying, well, what have you changed? And they're coming up with little tweaks like cache. And you're going, well, that's nice, but that's not a big leap. And they said, no, it's going to be much more performance. And it was when it came out. I can't remember what the percentage was.
Like 5-10% more single threading, but then like 40% more multi-threading because of the extra E-cores.
When you consider it's the same damn processor, apparently, where did that come from? And I was asking one of the guys on the design team, and I said, go on then, tell us what you've done. Because the thing is, they want to tell us they've done good work. And he didn't exactly answer the question, but the implication was, we've removed the safety catches. We've taken the locks off the core, and now stuff. And it was like, okay. And then when I reviewed the processor, it was significantly better. And I hope I said this in my review at the time, but I can't remember, of 13th gen this would be, which is, it's 12th gen on steroids, and yet apparently they haven't changed anything. And I suspect, and this is purely my suspicion, and I'm seeing Intel next week at IFA in Berlin, so I hope I'm not going to upset anybody. I suspect the engineers knew more or less what they were doing, and I suspect the accountant said, better you say, for no extra money, we'll take that. And I suspect it was that. So I suspect Alder Lake was what they intended it to be, and then Raptor Lake was, you can give us more, you say. And I think this is... it feels to me like this is the consequence. That is pure speculation on my part. Please don't sue me. But that's what it feels like. It feels like Alder Lake was what it should have been, and then they just magicked up extra oomph from somewhere.
So
and here we are.
I put out this ring bus flaw leak. I think at this point already it was a month ago. But at the time, and I believe still this holds true from what I hear, the rumor at Intel at the time, and I say rumor because a lot of people at Intel weren't sure why they were breaking, and it seemed to be a thing that they were keeping very localized, like don't talk to this team, let's keep this hush hush, which I'm sure there'll be class action lawsuits over that alone. But
right,
the understanding I have, and it's backed up if you actually look at what they did, is I was told the rumor is they upped the voltage on the ring bus a lot. Also, there are now double the E cores. So the way I don't remember if this is true in Alder Lake, but like at least in Raptor Lake, they made it so like the voltage between, I believe, one of the voltage rails between EMP cores and the ring bus is the same voltage rail. Meaning, how are we getting to 6 gigahertz? 1.6 volts. Well, but then you're clocking the ring bus to 1.6 volts, and now it's servicing 24 cores instead of 16 cores total. And so it's just breaking the ring bus. It's degrading the ring bus. And that's what it was. And so I was told this by a source. I went to another source and I said, does this make sense? And the person said, I didn't work on Raptor Lake, but I worked on Alder Lake. And a major concern on Alder Lake was that we could cook the ring bus if the voltage is too high. And I'm like, well, there you go. That's what it probably is.
That clip wasn't there. That I can't remember who put it up, probably on Twitter, but it was a clip of Tom Peterson, Tap, who was at Nvidia for years and is now at Intel on their graphics side of things and their AI side of things, in conversation with Gamers Nexus, and it was 5 or so years ago, so 2020, I guess pre-COVID. And essentially the conversation, so this is Tom of Nvidia at the time, and people are saying, how is it Nvidia constantly underpowers their cores and leaves all this good performance on the table? And Tom Peterson was saying, because I think there'd have been a reference probably to the likes of EVGA with their performance biases and so on, unlocking performance. And Tom was saying, yes, we know this, we understand this entirely. Believe you me, we could give you more performance if we wanted to. However, we want to give you longevity because the easiest way to kill a chip is more voltage. And it's like, there you go. Now, obviously, graphics are different. Sure. They're physically different chips. And, of course, they have direct eye cooling. They haven't got a heat spreader to get through, so you haven't got that thing. Because cooling these things is nasty. Cooling desktop processors with a lid on is nasty. I mean, the pore's doing something quite different to what the cooler's doing. But, yeah, I think it's voltage. I don't think Intel intended this to happen, of course. No. I think they were just literally playing with fire.
Well, and another thing that I heard was, and I heard this consistently, is that Raptor Lake was rushed through in record time. And the piece of this I can definitely add to is, I think I put out my first Raptor Lake leak, I want to say like right before Alder Lake launched, or like something, or right after. So like I think about a year or something before it launches. And then if you compare that to, well, I mean, I leaked Redwood Cove and Meteor Lake like 3 years before it came out. And what I'm getting at is I knew about Panther Lake, and what else did I know? I mean, yeah, I knew about Panther Lake, and I think I'd even heard of Arrow Lake before I had heard about Raptor Lake, meaning this was not on their roadmap, and they just came up with it out of nowhere.
They cooked it out of nowhere. And that's essentially what this guy wasn't quite saying. But I get the distinct impression the powers that be went to the engineers to say, we need something really quickly that's an improvement for which you've got zero budget. You can't do any redesigns or anything like that. You've got to use the existing stuff. How can you make the existing stuff do more, like now?
Yeah, because we've got to compete with Zen 4 is what I'm sure they said.
Right, exactly. And they presumably said something like, well, here's this thing. Now, whether internally they said, here's this thing, but for the love of God, don't do it. Or here's this thing, it'll be great. No idea. But it's essentially that. And the reason you hadn't heard about it in advance, and when they told me about it, I didn't believe it's going to be anything special, was because, what do you mean you've conjured it out of nowhere?
Well, I think there's a lot of copy and pasting, right? Like I was told too that, like, all right, we have 8 big cores again. We're going to double the little cores. It's almost like, yeah, so like do it. Just double it, throw it down, and let's validate. And they didn't probably put in remotely as much validation as they should have, assuming just because they're like copying and pasting parts of the design that it'll all work out fine. But it really should have had significantly more longevity testing. I mean, it really should have.
Yes, I suspect that they've pushed the limits in a number of areas and a number of times and got away with it, and this is the time when it really didn't go well. That's what I suspect.
This piece of content is brought to you by Micro Center. Micro Center is one of the best places to buy enthusiast gaming PC parts. Like right now, if you go there, you can get the 7800 X3D for $380, and it comes with 32 gigabytes of RAM for free. If you want to get really cheap, you can get the 7600X for $175, and that comes with 16 gigabytes for free. But I got to be honest with you, one of my favorites is the 7900X for just $320. But no matter which one of those you buy, or if you want to get the new Zen 5 products, some of those are already discounted at Micro Center as well, you're most likely going to find the best price on these products at a Micro Center. And it's really worth the travel time to get there, even if you're not right next to them. But you might be now, because they've just officially opened the Miami location. You can now sign up for early access to the Santa Clara location that's going to be new as well. And you can get a free 128 gigabyte flash drive if you do that. And they have a new custom PC builder as well, so that you can build your PC, whether it's at Santa Clara soon or Miami, and then show up and they'll have it built for you. They have tons of great features, tons of great products with great pricing. So support Moore's Law is Dead by clicking on those links in the description. Support Moore's Law is Dead more by checking out your local Micro Center today. Joe writes in, and he says, "Hi, Leo and Tom. I have a 13900K system, and I was getting crashes in Fortnite and an occasional BSOD when my CPU was stressed for a year. After installing the microcode update and downclocking my 13900K by 300 megahertz, I was able to complete a 100-minute Cinebench run without issues. So my question is, how long would either of you stay on this platform? My single-core performance is approximately 12900K at this point, and I'm not sure how much I can trust my PC going forward. You can't. If you were to change platforms, what would be your strategy?" Yeah, so I think as long as you're conservative, it probably won't break for a year, but I can't promise you it's not still going to break in 3 months. And I would just say, plan to upgrade within 12 months. Underclock it a ton, limit the voltages any way you can. And then once that happens, I think they have extended the warranty. So yeah, RMA it and then sell the one that we returned to you. That's what I would do.
Yeah, can't disagree with that. And as always, the thing, when should you buy, when should you upgrade, is how important is it, how urgent is it, how much money have you got? Because you can go AM4 with DDR4 on Zen 3 and have a perfectly decent PC that will be bulletproof, absolutely bulletproof. On the other hand, if you go AM5, then the question becomes Zen 4 or Zen 5, and that's a whole different bag of, question. But if you need a solid, reliable PC, unfortunately, right now, that's not Intel. And that's a really strange thing to have to say. But I dumped Intel for that reason myself a while ago, and I have no intention of going back to Intel anytime soon.
Yeah, because I'm looking at eBay here, and I think you can probably get away with selling this thing for $300 to $450. From that perspective, at least if you're in the United States, I know Micro Center, you can get like a 7800 X3D for like $350 with free RAM. And then there's a deal on motherboards at the same time. So you're almost getting to this point where, like, selling the i9, you can almost get a motherboard in 7800 X3D with RAM for the same price. If you already have DDR5, you don't even need to worry about buying new. If that's what your 13900K was on, was a DDR5 platform. So from that perspective, I almost don't know why you wouldn't just do it now.
Well, right, and then the other thing you run into is, sadly, it's the price of motherboards. And we suffer this as reviewers. We get boards pushed at us by the likes of MSI, which are like the Ace, the Meg X670 Ace, and so on, which are like £800 over here, i.e., more than the most expensive processor.
Right. Whereas
they do things down in the 250 range. I think they do an X670 Tomahawk, possibly. It's the bazooka and the mortar are really cheap ones, but they do like a £250, so it's going to be $250 over there, motherboard. And now suddenly, you're cooking with gas. You ally that with $100 of DDR5 and a processor. I mean, the 3D processors, both Zen 3 and Zen 4, are bloody excellent. I don't know if you saw, did you see a video I stuck up? Yeah, so it was 2 days, a day and a half ago. And it's looking at Zen, Zen Plus, Zen 2, Zen 3, Zen 4, Zen 5, Ryzen 7s in all those categories. And I have to say, even the older processors, the older Zens, I had to buy some of those off eBay myself used. I don't have them anymore. But the older processors now behave really well. When I first reviewed them years ago, because they came out in like 2017, 2018, 2019, they were awkward. The BIOSes weren't good. The motherboards weren't good. Now you can go back as far as Zen 3 and get a really good, as I say, I use it myself. Zen 2 now is surprisingly not rubbish. It just doesn't make economic sense. So Zen 3 is your entry point to my mind, or jump onto AM5, DDR5 and Zen 4. And if you're doing that, the 3D is a gem. Absolutely brilliant processor.
Yeah, the way I'd summarize, and I did check out that video you put out recently, like how Zen processors have aged is all of the successive Zen generations seem to out-age the old ones or gain more performance over time. Like when Zen 3 came out, well, I don't know, 20% better than Zen 2. Now it seems like 30%. Zen 3 X3D, 50% better at gaming than Zen 2. At the same time, Zen 2 has still aged well relative to Intel. It just hasn't aged as well as Zen 3. Same with Zen 4.
I have to hold my hands up and point out I was using an RTX 4080 on all those platforms. And if you're allying an RTX 4080 with a Zen 2 processor, you're a very strange person. But obviously level playing field, because if I changed the graphics in each of the different platforms, it would have been terrible. So I was giving those processors a graphics card they ordinarily would not see. But yes, other than that, what you said, exactly right.
Well, I mean, I use a 4090 with a 5950X. So, and it's because I don't game at 200 frames a second. Well, but it doesn't hold back frame rates at 130 hertz, which my monitor is 130. It's not 144. Right. So it's like, and frankly, the 4090, half of it's just for work. So I don't need maximum gaming performance there, or I'm just willing to turn on ray tracing and only game at 120 hertz. I go, oh no, but we're starting to talk about this. Let's pivot here. Chris Risk writes in and he says, 2024 has been a strange year for the performance of existing CPUs. As Raptor Lake has gotten worse due to power and voltage limits, while recent Zen processors have gotten faster due to the recent Windows update. Have you ever seen something like this before?
No. And the thing is that there's a bit of a backstory to the Windows stuff. So firstly, the Zen 5 reviews were delayed for reasons we don't know. We don't know what the reason was. We have speculation. The official reason given to us by by AMD was due to an abundance of caution. And when the guy was saying that to me, he was clearly reading a lawyer's letter. So I don't know quite what that means.
Yeah, that does sound like lawyer speak.
Yeah, exactly. So then we had the 6 and the 8 cores, and then we had the 2 9s a week later. Whereas we're going to have them all together originally. And then very soon after that, I was called by my AMD rep to say, we're going to be posting a blog post probably next week. Do you fancy covering it? And I said, well, depends what's in it. And he said, under embargo. I said, yes, of course it's under embargo. I understand that. What have you got? So he gave me the draft of this thing about 23H2, 24H2, and if you head off to the Windows Insider program, and it was like, okay. And so I did a video about that. So I had, and then we were contacted again to say, actually, we're posting it tonight. So it's like, okay, well, there's no way. So KitGuru did some news that evening. Literally news, and I did some testing on the back of that over the next couple of days and posted a video a couple or 3 days later. But the bizarre things about that was, if you recall, was AMD's pushing us to use a beta of Windows. Okay, why? What does it do? Don't know. The significance of VBS or memory integrity wasn't really laid out that's a significant factor, and the fact there was a patch coming from Microsoft very soon after, which effectively gave you apparently the Windows 24H2 update, that was clearly unknown to AMD. Just came out of the blue. But the really strange thing about the AMD blog post, apart from the fact that it's a blog post, not as a straightforward press release, was they're talking about gaming on the Ryzen 9 9950X. Who cares? Who games on a night? I mean, I appreciate you game on your 5950X, so do I.
But I didn't get 16 cores for gaming, no.
Right, exactly correct. That's something it can do, but that's not its primary focus. Now, if you're going to tell me that you got a change in performance on the Ryzen 7, I'm listening. But they were talking about the change. So they were doing A/B testing of Windows 11 23H2, 24H2 on the 16-core Zen 5. And it's like, but they weren't explaining why. So I did some testing, and yes, something's going on. And then various other people did testing. Hardware Canucks did a very good video. I think it's hosted by Mike, I think, yeah. And was saying they'd done a bunch of testing and they discovered some significant changes between one version of Windows and the next. And then they found the really big change is when you install 24H2 or the version of 24H2 they installed, it was disabling VBS, the memory integrity setting. So actually what they were seeing was a big boost because 23H2 was running with VBS on and 24H2 was running with VBS off. And that was the big change. And VBS makes a significant difference. It'll be change your frame rate from like 160 to 190 if you disable it. So you're turning off security. How important that security is, we don't know. Something I found, because I've been doing some more testing today actually, is if you're running on your AM4 platform, you'll very probably discover you cannot enable VBS unless you go in the BIOS and find one of those magic advanced settings, which you have to first enable in order that memory integrity is even an option. So AM4, it wasn't even a consideration. On AM5, I initially always disable VBS, a bit like resizable bar, because what's it doing? It's totally unpredictable and you get different results. So I was disabling it for consistency. I now think I was wrong. I said that in my last video. I think I was wrong doing that. And I'm retesting with VBS enabled to see what difference it makes. So all this Windows update and Microsoft patching appears, and they're saying it's to a branch prediction, but it appears to be to mitigate the downside of enabling VBS. It's a very long answer. I'm sorry about that.
No, but that's about right. And I you know, there's so many people besides you testing all of this. So I'm not going to pretend that I have all of the knowledge about this in my head right now. But I thought that I read too that like when it comes to branch prediction, or some people are saying this doesn't really seem to be doing that yet. That's probably just going to be another patch that comes if that's an issue. It seems like
I can well believe it. The thing is, so there's one good thing is that it would appear that the admin account hack, for want of a better word, appears to have just been blown away. That was something that was suggested for about 5 minutes, wasn't it? Run this thing in admin mode and you'll get better performance. And that appears to have been, in essence, disabling VBS without disabling VBS. I don't think AMD has got the least clue what Microsoft is doing with Windows 11. That's how it feels to me. I have to wonder, as I think a number of people have wondered, what could Microsoft have done for previous generations of AMD in years gone by?
Right, because I've got a summary here from Hardware Lux's testing, and we see the 9950X, and they are KB5041587 testing. But so 9% uplift for the 9950X, 12% for the 9700X.
Yeah.
And then you go to the 9800X 3D, only 6%, but 5800X 3D, 17%. And it makes you wonder, like, were Windows to be properly coded 3 years ago, would the 5800X 3D have been like 10%, 20% ahead of Alder Lake? I mean, what is going on here?
It's a very good question. The thing is that...
Although they did find that they boosted Intel too, so I should be clear. There's like a 5 to 10% boost to Intel as well. So
for many years, as many people have said, the Microsoft and Intel were known as Wintel.
Yeah.
And Intel would happily tell everybody who'd listen, I'm going back many years now, they haven't said it for a little while now, that Intel writes a significant part of Windows. And Intel would also happily tell us that Intel has more software engineers than AMD has employees in total. That was true for many years. It's probably still true, which is probably part of the reason why Intel's costs are so high and their headcount so enormous. And there's a benefit to that from our point of view, which is that there was a time when you'd install Windows and the thing didn't function until you then installed drivers, and you couldn't install drivers till you had a functioning computer. So it's a bit of a snake eating its own tail. These days, you install Windows and it's a functioning PC, and then the drivers just kind of buff it up and make it work. So it has to be possible. How can I put this diplomatically? It has to be possible that the Intel software engineers who have been working on Windows for many, many, many years had more of an incentive to favor Intel than they did AMD. That has to be a possibility, doesn't it?
I'd say it could be, but let me throw a contrarian argument at you. I've been hearing about Intel software problems in Meteor Lake and increasingly so in all of their launches for the past year, likely due to rushing launches, cutting headcounts. I mean, is there a chance they just didn't competently code this in general? Because their CPUs gain seemingly an average of like 5% or more. Maybe even, so I think some averages were close to what some AMD CPUs were getting. So I just don't know if, I mean, whether it's Intel or Microsoft's fault. I think a big conclusion a lot of people are coming to, I think you see Wendell at Level 1 Tech say this a lot, it's just Windows 11 sucks. I mean, let's say it. Like, it's a disaster of an operating system that doesn't seem to work well.
But Wendell, of course, who is a man who is he's a wonderful chap. Of course, he's also one of these freaks who understands Linux. So he's off in a world of his own, and he can discuss, hardware RAID for hours. So he's a fraction of a tiny percent, unlike us normal mortals. Meteor Lake and so on, yes, but the Intel software stuff you're talking about is really in the past year or two. Bearing in mind,
I'm just saying there's a trend there. Yeah. Well, I see what you're saying, but this has been going on for a while. Okay.
Right, and therefore, like to many things, it's broken cover relatively recently. But considering that Zen launched in 2017. I wonder if there's been a crossover period when stuff's been going on for, I don't know, picks, and let's face it, COVID can't help, can it?
Sure.
So I tell you what, let's be generous. Let's put it down to that. It's that period, it's that 20 to 2022 thing that just broke everything. And now, miraculously, Windows has suddenly discovered that Microsoft's discovered, rather, they can fix Windows and help AMD hugely. Actually, if I could just beg a favor, people listening in, if you'd like to put a comment under this video, I've had a handful of people have been responding to me asking me to test on Windows 10. Now, I'm not going to do it, but the Steam survey suggests that gamers are 50-50 Windows 10 and Windows 11. Now, I struggle to believe that applies to Europe and America, but it might do. I suspect that's the cyber cafes in Asia thing we've come across so many times. If you are an actual gamer on an actual PC using actual Windows 10, I'd love to know why. Thank you.
I use Windows 10, and it's because Windows 11 breaks half of my apps.
Well, there you have it, you see. Because this is the thing. I don't want to go back to Windows 10 or even use Windows 10, but if I'm ignoring half the audience, that's crazy. So...
yeah, I don't know. So my main desktop's Windows 10, mostly because I don't care. It works, and if it works, that's more important than anything. Windows 11, I haven't used it for a while, but I have, probably get rid of it soon, Raptor Lake benchmarking system for when I want to test GPUs. That runs Windows 11. And for simple usage, I don't really, I'm not complaining that my tablet has Windows 11 on it. It seems to work fine. But like, there are so many apps that I'm just used to using on 10, and Microsoft just switches out default apps. They switch out how things work, and they try to break any old version you try to download, and it's just such a headache. So will I eventually use Windows 11? Sure, but I will use it when they discontinue Windows 10, because that's when I think Windows 11 will actually work.
Okay, interesting. So we might even then spread the thought that perhaps Intel 13 and 14th gen will be fine on Windows 10. It's just Windows 11 that breaks them.
Oh, no. But yeah, I don't know. That is a curious question, though. Like, someone should check because for a while, right, there was like Windows 8 and Windows 7 testing, like which one's more efficient, and 8 was generally actually quite notably faster. I think 8 gets a bad rap for how well it worked, and you don't really see that with 10 and 11. People just use 11, assume 10's the same or worse. I really don't know if it's worse. I don't know.
Because they brought out Windows 11 when Intel launched Alder Lake, and because Alder Lake had that hybrid architecture, the P cores and the E cores. So the first question was, and Intel was trying to tell us you required Windows 11 to make it work correctly, which wasn't true. Windows 10 and Alder Lake were absolutely fine. But it's the thing, if you're benchmarking, I seem to recall benchmarking on both of them, but that was the last time I used Windows 10. I got away from it immediately after that. And I've used it on my own PCs without any difficulty immediately. I've never had a problem with it. Cross fingers. But if gamers are legit gaming today on Windows 10, then perhaps I need to rethink.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe like one test, but mostly I'd just be curious if there are big differences. I really have no clue. Chris Risk writes in. He says, there's a saying that every cloud has a silver lining. Do you see this applying to the Zen 5 launch at all? For example, AMD has realized that their internal testing has flaws and how that translates into day one reviews. And they highlighted the effects of Windows 24 H2 in a subsequent standalone patch that actually ended up benefiting Zen 3 and Zen 4 owners. It also highlighted the performance difference of Windows in Linux and other testing methodologies.
Yes. Now, the thing is that a handful of tech tubers have gone through the AMD reviewer's guide and lambasted AMD for the nonsense that they put in there. Things like gaming frame rates down to 6 and 7 decimal places and so on, which just looks ridiculous, plus a couple of egregious errors. The implication being is whoever put the guide together didn't actually read it themselves. Now, the thing is, I saw in the reviewer's guide a whole bunch of stuff that raised question marks. And the fact is I didn't care because I don't pay any attention to the reviewer's guide in terms of projected figures. AMD, when they have a habit they have done for a little while, when they send out processors, that they will release a BIOS which is only for like one MSI, one Asus, one ASRock, and 1 gigabyte motherboard. So you have to be running a particular model of motherboard, put that BIOS on it, and then they'll say, send us your Cinebench scores, your Cinebench 23 multi and single cores scores. And that, of course, in turn confirms the clock speed you're running at and make sure you've got Expo enabled. And if the figures are right, off you go. And they can do that because that's a pure processor test. In fact, Cinebench doesn't really care about memory. So they can do that, and that just confirms your processor's functioning. Whereas gaming, obviously bringing all sorts of stuff into the equation. Which game? How are you testing the game? Is it a CAN benchmark? You're playing it? What are you doing? What settings are you using? A million permutations. And of course, what graphics card? A big part of it. So they can't really double check your homework. So as a result, you get a reviewer's guide that's about 20 pages long, and I look at the first 1.5 pages. I read the rest and then totally ignore it, just to make sure there's not some weird gotcha in there. And that's it, and then on you go. So the fact that they've come up with updates as previously covered is just totally weird. The fact their internal testing does stuff, I'm not shocked. Do you remember the name Ryan Shrout? He was at PC Per. He was the founder of PC Per.
How can I forget?
I figured. And then he went to work for Intel, and now he's off doing a thing at another place called Signal 65. He was at Intel for a couple of years, I think. He went to Intel to essentially be their internal reviewer. His take, in other words, Intel realized that they test things differently to how reviewers test things. So it was like, here's some stuff, have a look at it and tell us what the reviewers will think of it. Because clearly Intel had been taken by surprise by how reviewers are viewing Intel products. And I think AMD has run into the same thing. The thing is, I know for an absolute fact AMD has people internally who could review stuff the way we review them. I just guess they aren't. So I guess they're just slamming them on a bench and getting a load of figures out, and there they go.
So I was actually told by somebody, I guess I should be careful, somebody who has experience with what AMD is doing internally with their product management, launches, marketing, sales, and how these teams communicate. What I was told, and I think this won't surprise anyone listening, is that it's been a complete flustercuck for the past few years, and that their marketing team really was never great and really degraded heavily over the past year or two, that their product management team in charge of how are we going to segment this, when are we going to launch it, never really is talking to the sales or marketing people effectively. And that's where you get a lot of this just weird all over the place decision making. I personally, I think it's I've said this recently, entirely plausible that internal people tested Zen 5, right, with VBS off, and then that's where they got these slides they showed off at, what was it, Computex, I think, that reviewers seem to have an issue with. And then the review guides were lower because the people who made the review guides didn't talk to those people and just got lower results and were like, I don't know. And I think that a lot of this, just horrible, no communication is where a lot of this disconnect happened in the performance, I think, probably. Or I shouldn't say probably, I should say I think we should consider that more so than them being, mustache twirling evil. And I also think that you can see their ineptitude in launching when you see, why would you launch 2 weeks before these patches are ready? Just launch at the end of August. Intel is all bad press. There's no impetus to launch quickly. Zen 4 is selling gangbusters. You need to launch now. And that it was just, so weird that they had the weaker ones launch first without I shouldn't say PBO, just without the proper TDPs they should have probably had. And that's what I think is going on. There's a lack of communication. I've heard heads maybe rolling over this one, actually, and I think they should. And it's just so crazy to think how different it would be if Zen 5 would have launched next week, all of them at the same time, proper TDPs that actually boost their performance in multi-threading by another 10-20%, and with patches that would have given them that extra 5% or whatever. It's just so silly.
However, you and many of the comments under my videos, the thing about X% and boost and TDP and so on and so forth, I mean, this is, after all, the kind of behavior that we're criticizing Intel for. Now, I appreciate the order of
170 watts. 170 watts is not 400 watts. That's what I would say.
I totally agree. But my point is that really depends on your perspective. So, as already said, so we had the Ryzen 5 and the Ryzen 7, and then we had the 2 Ryzen 9s. So we had 2 pairs of processors. So as you know, you have the fun and games of, for example, choosing a title for your videos, as in what are you doing here and how you're doing it. So I thought, okay, I can do the 5 and the 7 as one review, and I can do the 2 9s as one review. Or I can split them so the title is more accurate. The Ryzen 5, oh God, I can't remember what the product is now, 9600X, and then the Ryzen 7 9700X. Then that way the algorithm will find the title when you search. So I split them into separate reviews. And then you've got the question of, well, who's the customer for this? Now, the Ryzen 5 was nice and easy because it's not KitGuru's readers who are the audience who are the customers for Ryzen 5. Ryzen 5s are bought by people who are building a PC for someone else, like someone in the family, or someone who's going off to a PC shop to buy a PC. Now, to my mind, if you bought a PC 3, 4, 5 years ago and it was a Core i5 of that generation, and now you buy a Ryzen 5 of the new generation, a PC costs you $1,000 or whatever it might be, I think you'll be very happy. This new PC will be great, in much the same way that you said with the laptops powered by Qualcomm. It's very tricky when you're coming to a new laptop in 2024 to separate out the laptop part from the processor part. You've got a shiny new OLED screen, you've got Wi-Fi 7. The fact the processor might be very average, the next question is, does it run the software or does it not run the software? Which, as we know, Qualcomm is an issue. But the laptopness, the laptop could have Intel, AMD, or Qualcomm inside, and you're still getting the laptopness of it. The usability, the battery, and the looks. And with the PCs, if you haven't had a new PC for a few years and it's powered by a new Ryzen 5, it's running on no power at all and does a good job. End of story. With the Ryzen 7, it was also an easy review because once I got the figures, I was dead impressed by the TDP, the low power draw. It's 65 watts TDP, 88 watts socket power. And I'd reviewed it against a Ryzen 7 7700X. I didn't have the 7700 non-X. I now do have that part. If I'd compared it to the 7700 non-X, which is a very similar power draw, I would have probably had a different view. I wouldn't have been quite as warm about the Zen 5 Ryzen 7. But my advice was wait for the 3D part. So in a sense, it didn't matter quite how much I liked the Ryzen 7 or didn't. I'm still saying wait for the 3D part. So there's that. Then you get the Ryzen 9s. I expected to buy the 16-core new Ryzen 9, and I'm not going to, because it's not actually as good as I expected. The 12-core is actually pretty good. And now I'm waiting to see with those parts, the 3D parts of those, because as you said previously, one of the debates is, might they put 3D on both core complexes?
I hope so.
I hope so too.
I'm not sure of it, though.
No, but the Zen 4 3D with 3D on one cache or one complex and not the other, installing that was a nightmare. But again, I've retested those parts recently, and now it's as good as gold. The original Fun and Games of chipset drivers was a nightmare. This time around, it just worked because the software's evolved. It's caught up. So Zen 4 Ryzen 9 3D it's good, but why bother? You can have the Ryzen 7 3D for gamers. That'll work for 95% of people. And the Zen 5 Ryzen 7 3D, I predict here and now, will be brilliant when we get it. So the expectation going into my reviews was one thing, the reality was another. But if you go and buy a pre-built PC with a new Ryzen 5 or a new Ryzen 7, you will not be unhappy. I'm quite sure of it. But of course, as always, you're only buying the thing when you need it. You're not buying it for the hell of it. You're buying it because you need a PC. And the new stuff is not bad, but it's not the same generational leap that we want to see. But
that we've become used to, I guess is the way I put it
right.
too.
But we got used to that. The Ryzen 7 7700X was a real eye-opener for me when I was going back over my testing, because that thing is I think it's a 140 watt part from memory.
70, no, I think it's 105.
Yeah, but when you actually power it, because they've got their TDP and they've got the socket power. Now, compared to Intel, that's nothing, as you've quite correctly said. But compared to the other AMDs, they've clearly juiced the thing to make sure it beats the Zen 3 parts everywhere. That's clearly what they've done to the thing. And it worked.
So here's the funny thing, though. I've been trying to find this. I don't remember if it was Bauer or who did it, but maybe I saw it on Twitter. But someone did testing of performance per watt versus previous gen over, going from like 45 to 200 watts. And actually, Zen 5's peak efficiency delta over Zen 4 is at 170 watts. Like if you put them at 65 watts, actually, Zen 4 and Zen 5 are actually pretty close to the same performance. It's when you push the 9700X to around 140 watts that its efficiency is actually 30% better than Zen 4. So I'm just saying relative efficiency would have been better if they pushed it harder too. I think Gamers Nexus found that as well.
I don't doubt it, and I'm sure it could take it. And the thing is that the algorithm they use to balance the clock speed, the power, and the heat of the processors is fine. But I'm going to say the reason I went with a Zen 3 Ryzen 9 in my own PC is because that thing runs at a certain speed, and because it's very efficient, it runs very cool. Whereas the Zen 4 parts, they push them to like 90 Celsius. And you can, if you improve the cooling, they just run the processor faster, slightly faster. You don't get a lot of extra performance, but the thing will sit there constantly hammering off the thermal limit. I mean, I know you can change that, but I don't much like that approach. And that Ryzen 7 7700X it does exactly that. I think the 7700X was a bad part. I think the 7700 non-X is a really good processor. And if you got one of those, but the thing is, no one in their right mind is jumping from Zen 4 to Zen 5. No one.
Sure.
I mean, it's not even a question. Of course you're not doing that. In the same way, whereas if you had a Zen 2, you might have jumped to the Zen 3 3D. Now, that would be a good move. But Zen 4 to Zen 5, you're nuts. And you might even be running a Zen 4 3D, in which case you've got a golden processor. Sit with that one. Absolutely. As to whether you go from a Zen 4 3D to a Zen 5 3D, don't know. Maybe not.
It's just hard for me. I'm sorry. If I'm in the boardroom at AMD and I'm looking at the data and I'm like, if we're at 120 watts or 140 when it's boosting, but 105 watt TDP, and now we're getting 25% higher multi-threading than Zen 4, or we can be 65 watts and now we're 10%. I'm sorry. If I'm in the boardroom, I'm like, guys, Intel's using, the i5's using 200 watts. Who cares? Like, this isn't the world AMD built. Intel built this world where we're used to 200 watt flagships, or 400, I don't know, and 100 watt mid-range chips. So I don't hate the player, hate the game. Intel made the game, play the game. The game is 100. Nerds were using 100 watts because they are. That's what I would say. Come, get on board, nerds.
But your member of the audience asked the question, when were we aware that Intel had problems? I have to wonder, when was AMD aware Intel had problems?
Oh, I bet they knew. I bet they knew.
Of course. So when they're drawing up the TDPs and such like, might they have said to themselves, sure, we can boost it further. Stuff that for a game for soldiers. We don't want us no class action. Let them fry themselves. The other thing is, Intel is shortly going to run into a very tricky situation, which I'm surprised I haven't heard more people musing on. So Arrow Lake, or Core Ultra 200, is due to drop middle of October.
That's the rumor. Q4. Yeah.
Yeah. So the rumor is certainly Q4, but probably middle of October with Z890 motherboards. And the question is going to be, obviously, is, well, what power do they draw? And therefore, how well do they run and how hot do they run? And they're going to have to run them on less power than 14th
and I hear they
gen.
will.
And you'd like to think less power than 13th gen. But the thing is that unless they are much, much, much better parts than 14th gen, and I know that these new desktop parts, Core Ultra 200, but let's think of them as 15th gen, because in a sense they are. The architecture is going to have to be much better than 14th gen in order you can run it on a lot less power. In other words, they have to reset the power thing. We all know the power and the voltage is bad on 14th gen and 13th gen. So they have to drop it significantly. The question is how far. Now, pick a figure. Are they going to drop it to 200 watts for the Core i9?
That's what I believe, yeah. Maybe boosting to 300 sometimes, but certainly well below 14th and 13th.
Right.
Gen.
Now, I'm hearing talk about PL1, PL2, and I think I heard mention of PL4, PL3, PL4 figures, and I think I may have even seen a reference to PL5, PL6, which are like infinitesimal boost or something weird. They're measures. I hadn't heard of anything beyond PL1, PL2 before. And the implication was, as you say, boosting to 600 watts, which is like, no.
I haven't heard 600 watts. I want to be clear, but I'll never double down on it one way or the other with Intel, because it's Intel. We'll see what they do.
Well, indeed, because when they're in danger of losing a review, then maybe common sense goes out the window. But can you imagine it? I mean, they're damned if they do and damned if they don't. If they're going to be running into legal action over 13th, 14th gen, if they change their behavior with 15th gen Core Ultra 200, then they're acknowledging they got a problem. If they press ahead regardless, saying there's no problem here, we're going to kick up as reviewers and say, no, I'm not sticking that much power through the processor, but then we're running the thing out of spec. We have to, understand what the spec is. We can't just underpower it for the hell of it because we think it sounds like a good idea. So pick a power level. But Intel is going to have to reset the power to a certain extent, and they're going to lose performance in the process. They must do. And I think AMD is possibly looking, I might be giving AMD too much credit, but I think AMD is possibly trying to make sure they run into no legal troubles. They'll let Intel shoot themselves in the foot, and AMD won't have to reset the power themselves in the future. These TDPs they're doing, they can use forever. 100 watts for a Ryzen 7, 200 watts for a Ryzen 9.
So I think that perhaps because Intel didn't really know what was going wrong, like in fact, those baseline BIOS updates, I was told that actually made the problem worse. The problem isn't how much power it's using. The problem is that it's spiking voltage up and down. Yeah. And so if you limit TDP more, think about it. So now the limit's 200 instead of 300 or 400 watts. Right. So now it's boosting up and down the voltage more often. So they actually think that they may have broke more CPUs quicker with the baseline profile before these patches. Brilliant. So I think maybe that could have affected AMD, because if Intel doesn't know what's wrong, then AMD doesn't know. They're like, oh, well, we need to lower the power consumption, when in reality, Intel was just overvolting too much. And on that note, something I forgot to bring up earlier when we were talking that I think is very important. I think it is very likely, too, that these Intel Raptor Lake chips are all still going to break just in 1 year instead of 6 months, because if you look at, they're still boosting to like 1.55 volts. It's a ton.
It's horrible. It's absolutely horrible.
I think they put a Band-Aid on it, and they put a Band-Aid on it so that maybe it will last just long enough that they'll stem the bleeding enough that they can keep up with warranties. And to actually fix it, they probably had to go down to 1.45 or 1.4 volts, like what Alder Lake used, I believe. And the problem with doing that, though, is they know if they go below, I suspect, they know if they go below 1.5 volts, I think Tech Yes City has pointed this out, and so a few other websites, that is when it never quite hits advertised boost clocks, and that would be a clear-cut lawsuit. See, right now, it's going to be, oh, how many are breaking? Can you prove it? If it's breaking CPUs. Although that's certainly materially a bigger issue than, oh no, it's 5.9 gigahertz instead of 6. But if it doesn't hit 6 gigahertz, that is a clean kill lawsuit. You sold us something that it is. That's GTX 970 stuff all over again. And so that's my suspicion on what's going on with these patches is they know they're still going to break, but they're protecting themselves legally.
It was, but maybe it was Alder Lake when they brought out thermal velocity boost. I mean, maybe they brought that out previously. Yeah. And then they brought out an extra one, which was like the thing that made the Core i9 a Core i9 rather than the Core i7, when 2 cores would go the extra 100 megahertz and all that time. And at the time, it was like, if it works, that's fine. But it really felt like desperation. It was, what can we do that's going to differentiate the product? We'll push 2 cores a little bit more. And the thing is, when you're running around the 6 gigahertz mark, 100 megahertz is like 1.5%.
Yeah.
Boosting 2 cores by, call it 2% to round it up a bit, you don't notice it. Whereas what you're talking about with Keller's Royal Core, the idea if you amalgamate some stuff and now you've got 6 monster cores that are just like, that's a whole different thing. The idea that in order to differentiate your Core i9 from another model, you boost 2 cores by 2%, and it's like, oh, please. And of course, that meant you needed a specific version of their software for the specific process. Oh, pack it in. So, no, this is, the expression jumping the shark. They have essentially jumped the shark many years ago with this. They've just gone over and beyond, and they've now finally landed really badly. It's taken a while to get there, but this is horribly messy. But to rewind somewhat, I personally am actually happy with the way AMD is handling power for processors. I actually like it on Zen 5 desktop parts because I can see the benefits in the laptops, and I can only imagine, looks at his notes, it's Turin, isn't it? The Epic Gen 5. I can only imagine that those are going to be something quite monstrous on the kind of power that... if you extrapolate from the desktop and out to the server stuff, that strikes me as interesting. And if AMD doesn't feel the need to boost the power to desktop processors, I'm fine with that. I'm not surprised that the motherboard manufacturers are going to do it anyway, because that's what they've always done. I don't like that behavior personally.
Let me move forward to this question here. This piece of content is brought to you by the Minis Forum X7 Ti Ataman Mini PC. The X7 Ti is the world's first Intel Ultra 9 AI mini PC with a 4-inch touchscreen on the side that has flexible usability. It also has an Ultra 9 185H processor, speedy Wi-Fi 7, quad screen display, capabilities, and it also has Windows Hello, dual M.2 SSDs, and even the ability to use Oculink to add a dedicated GPU if you want to. If you'd like to support Moore's Law is Dead and check out this awesome product, please click on the links in the description, or if you actually want to buy it, use the offer code BROKENSILICON to save $30 off the Minis Forum X7 Ti. Doing so helps the channel a lot and saves you some money on a cool product. So check out the Minis Forum X7 Ti today. So KillGod writes in and he says, how do we think Strix Halo and RDNA 4 launches will go based on what we've seen from AMD with their Zen 5 and Strix Point launches?
Yeah, well, yeah, the rude answer is badly, or chaotically, and the honest answer is it depends. It really depends, because AMD seems to have this gift for launching stuff, and the opposition let themselves down. I mean, obviously, the Ryzen came along when Intel couldn't do 10 nanometer, and that gave them an opportunity for some years, and they took it, but they got lucky. Their laptop stuff is good, but this year Qualcomm could have changed things, but hasn't. Meteor Lake, in my opinion, was okay, but wasn't that great. And Lunar Lake, which is due to debut next Wednesday, which is why I'm heading off to this pre-IFA meeting, because Intel's doing this global launch of Lunar Lake, and they reckon it's going to be amazing. But then everything always is, isn't it? So I think for AMD, it depends what Lunar Lake does. If Lunar Lake is as good as AMD as Intel claims, then that's not going to help AMD. And if Lunar Lake isn't great, then AMD is on a roll. But their current laptops, what was it called? The AI 300, terrible name.
Yeah, terrible name.
Brilliant processor, absolutely brilliant, really good SoC. They've done a fine job with that, and the laptops are nice. Happy.
I would say, answering Kilgon's question from my perspective, I don't know if AMD is going to fumble another launch. I don't know, guys. But we'll break it into two buckets when it comes to Halo and Kraken, which I think really should be thought of as sister processors. Like Kraken kind of seems like in between, or arguably a replacement of Hawkpoint, but with Zen 5 and better AI added onto it. And then above that is Strix Halo, which I don't know if you've heard me say this, but I suspect they're going to call this AI 400. I mean, that I actually think that. And I don't know if I was in the boardroom, I would say, why the heck aren't we? We're going from 12 cores to 16 cores, 16 compute units to 40 compute units, and then we'll have Kraken for the low end. It's called AI 400 and launched in February or something. Like, yeah, we're doing 2 gens a year now, nerds. Come on. Like, that's what I would say. I would also suspect, because this is the second generation of Zen 5, arguably, not like in the sense that it's Zen 5 Plus, it's not what I mean, but it is their second wave of these launches on new platforms, that I would be surprised if they're as chaotic. I would suspect that within 6 months, or well, I guess now it's within 3 or 4 months, they'll have the software down. This was a rocky launch, and they'll hopefully have learned some lessons. I've also directly been told that RDNA 4's launch should be much more of a straight shooter launch and much less chaotic than RDNA 3. That doesn't mean that I'm sure it won't have problems, though. So I think RDNA 4 will launch better than RDNA 3. And I'd be very surprised if, given that they had half a year to get their stuff together, Strix Halo launches with nearly as many problems. If it did, that would just blow my mind. That would tell me they'd never learn from their mistakes.
Well, the thing is, of course, that the desktop processors we've just been dealing with is, of course, a processor that AMD produces, and it's dropping into the existing motherboards, because for some reason they launched them without the new motherboards, which is just bizarre. Again,
they didn't need to launch it. They could have just launched it a couple months later. It's so silly.
But the point is, it's a launch that they did, and therefore it's on them. And obviously they have to work with the motherboard manufacturers, but given that the Agisa microcode is a large part of the BIOS, essentially they can say to motherboard manufacturers, put this code in your BIOS, everything's going to work. And that's pretty much the end of the involvement of the partners. With laptops, clearly someone's got to make the damn laptops. So you're relying on your Acers, your MSIs, your whoever's, your Clevos. So they're making laptops, and these people have made a lot of laptops over a lot of years. So even if AMD does do something quite bizarre, there's somebody else there who's been doing this for a very long time to point out the error of their ways. And it's not just one company, it's a great many companies. So I don't think AMD could completely muck up a laptop launch because there are so many other companies.
Oh, that's
and after all,
interesting.
if all the laptop partners are ODMs and the rest of them, there isn't really the equivalent of Intel's Ultrabook thing, for example, as in AMD says, yeah, do a nice screen, that'd be good. But when all said and done, it's down to Asus. If the Asus
they have the Advantage laptops, right, which have some of that stuff, I think.
But that comes down to, but Asus is making the ZenBook, whichever OLED thingamybobby, and they're going to say, no, hang on a minute, we've got a really good cooler on it, and there's something wrong, or whatever it might be. AMD's got to produce the chips, they've got to produce the drivers, but a lot of the work is done by other companies, and those companies have been doing this a lot of years. So unless they've made something broken, I don't think they could muck it up.
There's much more hand-holding in a laptop launch, so AMD is less likely to screw it up, I see.
Yeah. Whereas the desktop processors, I don't know what they were playing at with the Granite Ridge processors. Why they deliberately launched the processors when they're intending to launch the motherboards that go with them later. Because the thing is, for a lot of the desktop processors, it's not the DIY customer who's the main customer. It's the system integrators. It's the PC builders. They're the ones who are buying trays of Ryzen 5s and Ryzen 7s and rather fewer Ryzen 9s.
Well, I've heard that might have been why they rushed the launch, though, is that they wanted Ryzen 9000 for back to school, and they wanted 65-watt TDPs so they can use cheap coolers.
Right. They're the only people that can drive it. Now, the thing is, I don't know whether the system integrators have been demanding new desktop processors from AMD at this time of year. If they have, that would be the explanation. But I don't know why they would be demanding new desktop processors at this time. After all, the back to college, back to school thing, that's laptops and phones. So that would be an explanation. But
and it's still AMD's fault for agreeing to it. I mean, the buck stops with AMD.
Oh, yeah. No, the buck stops with them. I mean, at the minute, it's just inexplicable. It's just very strange. And the idea they'd always intended to launch the X870 motherboards with alleged faster memory support and USB 4. Yay. End of September. I mean, since when do you launch new motherboards, a month and a half after your processors? I mean, that's not a thing.
You don't.
No, never. I mean, that's not a thing. That's the weirdest thing. So, no, I've got no thought about that at all. That's just weird.
Let me see here. So Christian Visconti writes in and says, "Hi, Tom and Leo. Early leaks about Navi 48 are emerging from the web. What do you believe the performance is going to be for these RDNA 4 cards? Do you think AMD can succeed in taking GPU market share this fall? And do you believe we are going to have 3 SKUs or just tons of them all crowding the same area?" I was told that they're planning 4 in the midterm.
Yeah. However, we are talking, are we not, down the product stack? They cannot compete with Nvidia at the top of the stack, can they?
They're choosing not to. They're launching smaller dies. So
therefore, it's and I'm convinced that AMD's focus is money, making money. So it's going to be that. So forget this discounting to grab the market share, which is what we want to see. They haven't done that now. When did they last do that? I've lost track. A while ago.
It depends what you. It depends how you count it, right? Because I feel like they've tried to a few times, and the 7800 XT, even though I think that should be called the 7700 XT, I think that one was a push. They're like, you know what? It has to be $499. That's the price they want to see, and I was told it sold very well. But then they do stupid things like the 7900 XT for $900. So, and I think they thought that was aggressive. So the question is are they smart enough to even know what aggressive means anymore?
Oh God! When whoever the AMD guy was who that debating term, wherever
Scott
that came,
Herkelman, yeah,
just admit it. The one thing AMD has done right has been to not dick around with the Nvidia thing. We'll put 7 gigabytes of memory on it or 8 gigabytes of memory. We'll segment it because why? At least they just slap on a nice sensible number. As to what the speed is, that remains to be seen. I'm unfortunately, I think it's going to come down to Nvidia because they just own the graphics market. It's going to be whatever crumbs and whatever little market segment looks like it's available to AMD, and they'll go in there and they'll match Nvidia on pricing because Nvidia can crush them, just crush them. I mean, we all know if Nvidia wanted, they could launch these things at $300, but they want their margins. They could just extinguish AMD in the GPU market, and they're doing what Intel used to do, which is they just give them just enough oxygen to survive. So that, Nvidia has only got 95% of the market, wherever it is. AMD, I don't think, has any agency in this. It's entirely down to Nvidia.
Yeah, I mean, that's what people tend to say every time for the past few years. I personally, and again, this is what I think is possible. I don't know if AMD will do this. But my opinion is there actually is an opening this year because NVIDIA has taken their eye off the ball when it comes to graphics cards. And legitimately, look how much money they're making. I mean, they're not dumb for doing that. And I think were AMD to be aggressive, NVIDIA would care less than usual. And I think there's a world here where NVIDIA's like, look, if you want to take, I think they're like 25% of the GPU market. If you want to get to 35 AMD, go for it. We're going to keep our margins and keep focusing on AI. And I don't think AMD gets an opportunity like that often because I'm fairly confident that the AI bubble is going to crash. And within a year, once it crashes, NVIDIA is going to go and boom. I don't know if it's Van Neumann or what the one coming after Blackwell is. And they're going to go and Maxwell time. We're going to be aggressive again because we have to. And I don't think they're going to this year because I don't think NVIDIA really cares about gaming right now. And I think from what I'm hearing about RDNA 4 is correct, that they've really actually managed to get something that is even close to 4080 performance in a die size that's smaller than the 4080. That means that's a cost advantage AMD does have over NVIDIA, like a huge one actually. And were they to be able to launch that for 500 or 600 is kind of what I heard recently, but we'll see. I think that's something that really could take some market share right now. But it's only this year that I think it will, because if it were to happen next year, absolutely, that's when NVIDIA can respond and they'll have their eye on the ball again.
I can tell you for an absolute fact, there are people at NVIDIA whose job is to never lose a review, ever. And it doesn't matter what the facts of the situation are. Many, many, many years ago, I think the model code was 5800. Back in the days of graphics cards being called GT and such like. I'm rewinding here 20 years, maybe even slightly longer. And it was a graphics card that had, back when coolers were terrible.
Yes.
And it had a blower cooler, and it was like,
I remember.
It was like a Dyson. It was awful, truly terrible.
And people had a lot of tolerance for louder coolers back then. So for this to be bad, it had to be really bad.
Right. And sadly, I think that's part of the reason why companies such as EK are suffering so badly, is because these days you've got a really good cooler in graphics cards. Why it's so blooming large? You're paying a lot of money for that cooler. Why would you take off this really large, really effective cooler? They used to be terrible. And this cooler was, I was in the room while it was being tested, and it was a room full of server kit, and the room was noisy, and this thing was the noisiest thing in the room. And when the review went out, not done by me, and the review mentioned it was horribly noisy. This is print, obviously. And I remember the person from NVIDIA getting on the phone to the review editor and screaming at him. And the review editor was saying, but it was. And essentially it was, and your point, it was basically, it's unacceptable for us to have a bad review. That was then, when NVIDIA was tiny. NVIDIA is now this colossus, and there are different people in different roles in NVIDIA. And I can think of a specific guy, and his job is to never lose a graphics card review. Doesn't matter what the facts of the matter are. If you're saying we don't care about, like when people were saying a few years ago, we don't care about ray tracing. Ray tracing, yes, you can turn it on in Battlefield, but it sucks. It's like
in Battlefield 5, yeah, it was terrible.
Right. But there's someone in NVIDIA's job whose job is to not that, no. And their job is not to fix the ray tracing, it's to fix the reviews.
Yeah.
Now, clearly they can't go around and literally make the videos for you and literally change the pixels for you, but it's their job to, at the very least, offer you ways of looking at the thing. My point is, and then there are certain channels and certain review sites who you might think will give into that kind of pressure, and there are certain people who you think will never give into that pressure. And we can think who those people are. But the point is, Nvidia does not lose focus. Blackwell at the minute, these delays with Blackwell.
Well, they're delays of the AI chips. The gaming chips are fine.
Yes. So on the server side, so it sounds like the specific issues is they've announced products going up to 2,000 watts that require liquid cooling, and it sounds like they've got problems with all sorts of issues, not TSMC as such, but everything to do with putting the chips in the racks and the cooling and the power and the everything. A whole legion of problems, such that they're going to launch them initially, I think, up to only 1,000 watts. But they're doing massive things in this. Yeah, quite. I mean, because at the minute the racks, I believe, got up to 20 kilowatts, and Nvidia is going to push the racks up to 120 kilowatts, a factor at 6x power, and that means you have to stack them rack empty in order. So essentially, so a pair of racks, instead of being 2 by 20 kilowatt, would be 1 by 120. But that's still 3x on the power. It's a massive step. So initially, they're apparently only going to 1,000 watts, and they're going to have to be, whichever cooling and so on. There's lots of big changes. But I can guarantee you, despite these huge changes, there's someone whose job is to never lose a graphics card review on the desktop, even though the money is relatively insignificant, because that's the kind of company Nvidia is.
Well, they haven't always succeeded, though. 4060 Ti got horrible reviews. And
Sure.
They had a misstep there where I don't know why they thought people would buy 8 gigabytes for $400, but man, I've never seen so many consistent bad reviews for an NVIDIA product. And the 4080 didn't get very good reviews either.
Apple made a phone that you couldn't hold and make a phone call because you'd blocked the antennae. And then they told you're holding the phone wrong. It is the same mentality. It is create a new reality. That they are that Jensen, I think I said this to you a year ago. Jensen Huang is a different kind of person. I'm not even sure he's human. He's just something else. Even though they came up with this product, which should never have been come up with, there are still people going into, and they're even in their quietest moments, they don't admit it was a stinker. Mm-hmm. Other companies will go, yeah, okay, that one we dropped the ball. Nvidia doesn't. They just don't.
Compressed AI Blocks writes in and says, how important do you think RDNA 4 could be to the market or economy? A lot of people are feeling the cost of living squeeze, and I was looking at a GPU upgrade to Blackwell, and it seems like it's not for the average consumer.
Agreed. I suspect, sadly, the importance of RDNA 4 is how well it reads across to CDNA 4, assuming that's what it's called. In other words, it's all AI and servers. Everything is AI and servers. I'm quite certain that we get the scraps of the market. I was truly shocked that AMD, maybe they will still, didn't look at the second half of this year and go, Nvidia has run into many problems with Blackwell, and we're not expecting 50 series desktop this year. Now,
I am.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Yeah, but the 5090 on Christmas, so, that's what I've always been saying is, are you going to buy it? No, but they'll have a 5090, I think, this year.
But the thing being is, AMD, I would have thought, could at least do one of these promotional things like Sapphire tends to do with a box that's around a particular game. It's more than just giving you a voucher for the game. Do a push, get some stuff out. Essentially do something that's going to promote. But a new game is the classic kind of tie-up, and they haven't. And I think it's going to be much the same as with RDNA 4. I hope it's good. I have every expectation it'll be a continuation of good. But I think the focus is on AI and servers. We just get the spin-offs from that.
So I wonder if you saw my 8800 XT leak like a week ago or something, but it spawned from one of my best sources telling me, and I actually called this person because I'm like, are you serious? They told me that it's launching in 2 months. That actually it's finalizing now. And I was like, and this is why I called the person. I'm like, really?
Oh,
That's
okay.
soon?
No, I missed that. That's the beginning of November.
They said it could even be October, like, so end of October. So I'm like, hey, maybe I'll look stupid, everyone listening. I don't know. I wouldn't have run that story unless I called people up. But what I was told is, yeah, that was intentional. AMD told AIBs, they gave them everything they needed to launch by Q4, but then they told AIBs it's Q1 so that NVIDIA wouldn't feel like they need to launch soon. So that's why we'll see if that happens. I think, and remember, I told you I also heard that AMD hired some people to help them get their crap together in marketing and project management. So I hope this happens. I guess I won't believe it. It's AMD. I'm not going to believe it until I see it. But that there might actually be finally some smart moves here. And they aren't always stupid. They were really smart with RDNA too, you know.
Yeah. Well, no. In that case, then perhaps this is the Blackwell has given them the opening, and in order to respond quickly, if they can actually bring out a new actual new thing, and not just like a pretty box, then great. However, I'm quite sure they'll price the thing, at Nvidia levels, and want as much margin as possible. Because apart from anything else, I mean, how many wafers can they have run? Bearing in mind that Turin hasn't yet come out and all the rest of it, so they must be doing wafers for that. How many wafers can they run for GPUs with the lead time they've got? They have to take a bet.
That's something I'll probably, I imagine I'll have an update about that at some point soon. I really don't know volume on that right now. I know they've shipped a ton of Strix, but that's not RDNA 4. What I would point to is I was told that RDNA 3 production ended a few months ago. And I'm like, why would you do that unless you know you're going to replace this soon? And if you go to Newegg right now, and this is worth pointing out because half a year ago, the 7900 XTX in America was going towards $800. Now it's at $1,000. Why would that? Because they don't have a lot of them in stock anymore. So there's this public evidence too that AMD is preparing for something. Granted, I bet they're also stopping RDNA 3 production because frankly, GPUs just aren't selling well right now anyways.
Right. Well, then sadly, a big thing's going to be, so AMD, obviously, if they can launch a new architecture, new graphics, and here's this thing, that's great. I mean, that's a good thing to launch, clearly. I think you'll be able to then you'll be able to tell by the pricing when it lands, because they've got a window of a couple of months or something like that. If it's a 5090 that lands at Christmas, that's going to be $1,500 or whatever, isn't it?
Could be 2,500. I mean,
well, right, exactly. And if it's 5080, then maybe that's the 1,500. The point is, if AMD prices below 1,000, why price it at 900 or 800 if you can price it at 999? It's all this, it's the same market. That market segment goes from 0 to 1,200. Why would you leave money on the table? And then there's also going to be a question of how many wafers have they had to run? How many graphics cards are there? If it's 5,000 graphics cards rather than 50,000 graphics cards, they'll just want to sell them for all the money they can grab, won't they?
Well, but I mean, I believe the die size is going to be between 250 to 350 millimeters squared.
Yeah, but that's the cost, though.
Yeah, but it does have to do with capacity. That would be the reason they'd want to switch to it as soon as possible. Is they can make 2 of these cards in the same capacity they can make like a 7900 XTX overall. If you combine the nodes, it's like, well, then all the more reason to switch to this as soon as possible because you can make a ton of them and the same amount of wafers versus the previous generation.
Oh, absolutely, but it
and no one's buying Zen 5, so you might as well sell this
because, of course, but they're having to commit allocation, aren't they? So maybe that's the reason Granite Ridge came out early. Of course. What fabrication process are these new graphics on?
4 nanometer. Right.
So then that's your explanation. We've got it. Granite Ridge is 4 nanometer. Turin is 3 nanometer.
Turin is both.
Yeah, but Zen 5 is 4 or 3, but the Granite Ridge desktop parts are 4. The Epic parts, or the good Epic parts, I assume are going to be 3.
Yeah.
So maybe they got Granite Ridge through, because I mean, how many desktop processors do they actually sell?
You're saying they ran through their production of Zen 5 4 nanometer
Zen
first.
5 desktop, so they can actually get on to do the graphics.
Maybe. That's actually an interesting idea.
Once they put them through the packaging plant, it's like, well, there's no point keeping them on the warehouse. Now, they could have kept them till they got the motherboards ready. That would be the smart move. Instead of which, presumably, it's like, no, hang on, we're holding inventory here, sell them. So then that's just the most stupid launch of all time. But that seems like a not stupid theory. They did Granite Ridge 4 nanometer so they could get onto the graphics 4 nanometer.
And then, they can still make the 3 nanometer Turin chips, and depending on what people want, they can make more of the 4 nanometer version or not, depending on what actually sells.
What I want is bloody 3 nanometer Granite Ridge. I want the 3 nanometer Zen 5 desktop part.
But those are Zen 5C though, so you're going to get lower clocks on that. I don't think they're going to. I was told they could do that if they wanted to, like 32 cores on AM5 or 8 plus 16. But when I look at the bandwidth constraints, I don't think they're going to, because I just don't know if they have enough bandwidth on AM5 for 24, 32 cores right now.
No, I suspect you're correct. And also, I think desktop, sadly, is just an afterthought. The laptops are important, and server graphics are hugely important. EPIC is hugely important. Our stuff, and then you've got those different blocks, and then desktop graphics. If Nvidia's dropped the ball and there's a quarter available, suddenly, opportunity. So it sounds like they have responded to opportunity, but you have to do the wafer starts. You've booked wafer starts. You have to allocate them, and that must be a hell of a job. So that seems plausible, actually.
Yeah, and
that doesn't sound like a stupid theory.
The PS5 Pro launches, I believe, in November, also using basically RDNA 4 on 4 nanometer. So that will be another concern. That was a problem for RDNA 2, is Nvidia was able to walk away with market share, not because Ampere was really better than RDNA 2, but because they just had unlimited production practically at Samsung, whereas AMD had Sony knocking on their door saying, yes, we would like more PS5 capacity, please.
However, Xbox capacity's just dropped, hasn't it?
It's gone. I don't know. Yeah.
So clearly on the gaming side of things, it means that Sony can have basically the lot.
Yeah, so there's no Xbox competing for 4 nanometer like they were for 7 in the past.
Right. Whereas it originally, both Xbox and PlayStation were absolutely, you couldn't buy either. So now, in a sense, and that hit AMD in their last financials, didn't it? They got clobbered on the gaming side, and that's purely Xbox. So it'll be a nice thing to have back. They'll want it back. It'll be a good thing all round. We don't think the margins are very high on the gaming side of things, because the console makers don't pay that much. I wouldn't have thought.
I think they're fine. They're just not as high as other places.
Right. But it's not EPIC. It's not MI300 or MI325 or MI350. Those are really important. So I think this is a bit like the spinning the plates on the sticks. The console stuff matters because it keeps everything going. But what AMD doesn't need is just a product that keeps wafers going through TSMC. They don't have that problem.
Clean Sweep writes in, says, hey, Tom and Leo, given AMD's marketing fumbles over the past few months, what do you think they need to do, besides competitive pricing, to sell gamers on RDNA 4? What would be the single biggest mistake they need to avoid?
Again, I'm going back to my thing, which is I'm sure it comes down to the gap Nvidia leaves and the sectors they leave. If Nvidia's essentially left them a clear quarter and they can sell into that quarter, then they've got the opportunity. And if Nvidia's pricing is horrible. So, but sadly, I think it's good pricing. AMD's good pricing is still too high, but they will sell. That's the thing; they'll sell. And if they literally have a window of $0 to $1,200, they'll say $999 sounds good to us. Why would we sell for $699? It's nothing to do with the bill of materials. It's to do what they can sell for.
Yeah, I mean, I think I the biggest mistake they could make is forgetting what they're selling. What we have is a 16 gigabyte card that probably costs less to make, actually, or certainly not much more than the 7800 XT. And it doesn't even use GDDR6X. I mean, it's 20 gigabit per second GDDR6 that tells you this was built for volume. Otherwise, why wouldn't they use faster memory? And that's what will make it good, right? Is it was built to be the next RX 480. If you try to make it the next 6900 XT, that's what would make it fail. And
is AMD actually able to source the faster memory, or does Nvidia basically have first, second, and third dibs on that?
Well, I don't think they would use 6X. I don't think AMD likes the X GDDRs because they just see it as too power hungry. And I frankly mostly agree with AMD on that. I think the question is would they try to like get GDDR7 in there, which you're right, Nvidia would probably try to buy all that up, or would they put in some of this allegedly real like 24 gigabit per second GDDR6, although a lot of experts tell me that doesn't really exist. It's just Samsung pretending they have faster memory than Micron. They really don't. So, you know, I think, but the fact that they're not pushing the memory speed hard tells you that they don't want to be constrained, right? That they're not giving NVIDIA that opening to constrain them like they have before in the past.
I suspect so. So I think they have to play it cautious on the specs, because I don't think they can necessarily buy the chips they want. It might be better with this, but it ain't necessarily available or not available at a decent price. Therefore, they're not going for the ultra high end bleeding edge. So play it sensible. But sadly, although that affects a bill of materials, that doesn't necessarily affect the selling price, because margin. And AMD, they've done this now for the last few years, which is if they can sell for Nvidia prices or something approaching Nvidia prices, they do. That's just how it is. I hope I'm wrong, but I think my feeling is that RDNA 4 graphics cards will be perfectly decent. The drivers seem to continue to be okay, pleasingly so.
I've been using an AMD graphics card the past month, and it's super smooth right now to me.
Right. Their software continues to evolve. They don't kind of make, I mean, they obviously often shout about the leaps they make, but they genuinely seem to be. As I mentioned, I've recently gone back to Zen Plus, Zen 2. Apart from the fact they have a different version of Ryzen Master for Zen and Zen 2, surprisingly, it's a different piece of software and it looks horrible, old and clunky. There's clearly some different functionality going on, but chipset driver installation and the behavior of the thing and the BIOS and the so on and so on and so on, it's all so much better than I remember. It's just, continual evolution, which it's clearly across the piece, because they must have some sort of unified software model going on. But the graphics drivers from AMD have improved significantly and incrementally over time. They are perfectly pleasant. But sadly, I think RDNA 4 will come out fine. If it means they can get a Q4 and actually make some money and get a product out there, I'm happy. I suspect it won't be cheap. Nothing like as cheap as we want, but they'll sell. I'm confident they'll sell.
Now that it's warming up outside, Jesse couldn't be happier to be jumping around every day in the warmer weather. And it's good for me too. Running around with her, teaching her tricks, that's good for my health as well, not just hers. But all of this gallivanting, well, it takes up time and it pressures me to make my lunches quicker to get moving faster with Jesse every weekend afternoon. And usually quick means less healthy. Well, unless you know about Vite Ramen. This piece of content is brought to you by Vite Ramen. Vite Ramen is a healthy, tasty, and shelf-stable food crafted by an American startup that offers a ton of options for eating healthy, like their classic packages that make it easy to add protein and other ingredients of your choice, and then also their Ramen Go packages that offer a healthy microwavable option for those who truly only have a 15-minute lunch break away from home. And I do need to take a second also to remind everyone that they don't just make ramen. They also have Nano Boost Vitality Powder that I honestly think blows away the health powder competition. I literally drink this any night a broken silicon is recorded extra late instead of coffee. And they also have a collection of silverware and accessories that are always high quality. Like the Goofy Girl DM Nakiri knife, I tried it out. It is insanely sharp. It is probably the nicest knife this household owns. So not just the ramen, although the ramen's great. Everything else on there is high quality, and that's why I've been working with Vite Ramen for so long. I actually like their products, all of their products, a lot. I've never tried something they made that wasn't good, so check them out. And remember that even just clicking on the link in the description helps the channel a ton, and buying some of the special packs through that link helps you save money and support the channel even more. So support Moore's Law Z by checking out Vite Ramen today. Speaking of not cheap, King Koro writes, and it says, "Hi, Leo and Tom. RDNA 4 sounds promising, not only because of the ray tracing performance that's rumored, but also the matrix cores for accelerated training and inferencing. Are 32 gigabyte consumer versions a consideration at AMD? In my opinion, an aggressively priced 32 gigabyte variant could be an interesting alternative to get more students and smaller dev teams to try ROCm over CUDA. I've heard a lot of AI developers say that as well. Now, aggressively priced, I think he just means like $700 to $1,000, because it's like, well, look, the 5090 is probably going to be, I don't know, 100% faster than this. But were they to give you a 32 gigabyte version for $1,000, which they can afford to do, that might be a way to brute force some AI market share here with developers. I think it's an interesting idea. Also, I think of it as an interesting consolation prize to not launching a high-end card.
Like an AI workstation, you mean? Like a junior machine?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people use their desktop cards for development, and they just wish. Some people use bloody Alchemist only because it has 16 gigabytes for free. So the idea would be, well, if we gave, even if it was $1,000, a 32 gigabyte edition, this could be our enthusiast play this generation. It's not stronger than the XTX, but it has more RAM. And you don't get the 5090, get this.
They've done something similar in the past with I can't remember what the numbering was. It was the ones they called W for, professional workstation use, and essentially it was double the memory, and then I think they painted them blue rather than red.
Yes.
So the principle of doing that, i.e. doing CAD and you want more memory, here you go. It's differentiating Quadro from GeForce RTX. Similar principle. Yes, however, I am prepared to bet a small amount of money that if they do all those good things, they'll charge a nose-bleeding amount of money for it, because they'll see workstation, they'll see professional, and therefore low price. Why would you bother? Just charge. Sadly, because that's what they've always done with workstation cards. Has always been like that. They tried to do something a bit cutesy a few years ago, where on time of Vega, with graphics cards where you could put an SSD on the graphics card, M.2 SSD.
That's a cool idea.
The idea sounded really neat. I don't know if it ever worked or not, but instead of messing around with 16 gig with a terabyte, it's like, okay, something like that, if it functioned, could be really neat. Load your model to the graphics card and walk away. But I don't know. But that kind of innovation seems to have gone the way of the Dodo. I love that idea. That's such a good idea. But I think if your member of the audience gets what he wants, I think he's going to have to pay for the privilege, because, again, professional equals more.
All right. So some of the final stuff I want to talk with you about here is Lunar Lake. That's going to be launching over the course of the next 2 weeks. I say over the course of the next 2 weeks because I kind of hear it's going to be a semi-paper launch similar to when Meteor Lake came out.
I'm convinced of it, yes.
But so what do you expect out of Lunar Lake? Let's talk about it, though.
What I expect from Lunar Lake is that Intel will forget Meteor Lake ever happened, and will be able to say, we've got 50 tops, and therefore we can do Copilot Plus, which means that the big selling point of Qualcomm laptops will, for this year, go up in smoke, because that's their thing at the minute, which is they got 50 tops, they can do Copilot Plus.
Well, they got 48 tops. AMD has 50 tops.
Well, but at the moment, it's Qualcomm that has the Copilot Plus branding from Microsoft, because essentially Qualcomm has kind of become the Microsoft Surface partner, haven't they?
Well, yeah, but so does Strix is also Copilot Plus, though.
Does it have Copilot Plus branding?
I mean, it should.
Does it have Copilot branding?
Okay, what I'm reading is they will, but they don't at launch.
Exactly
so they
right.
will get Copilot Plus in a month or two, they will say the AMD ones are Copilot Plus. But this week,
But
they're
when?
not.
But when? That's the question. In other words, it would seem so. Microsoft clearly has, whether it's arbitrary or whether it was the deliberately chosen figure, they have a hardware requirement of tops. Otherwise, forget it. You don't qualify. Meteor Lake, forget it, didn't qualify. And then the question becomes, okay, we qualify. Are we allowed to? And I think AMD falls under the heading of, well, you could have Copilot Plus when we allow it. I'm not saying it's a big deal. I mean, to us, it's not a big deal, but to these companies, it's a big deal.
Yeah, it's this freaking Microsoft Qualcomm junk. It really is. Like, I mean, I've talked about this in other pieces of content. I was directly told that like the amount of money Microsoft invested in making Qualcomm compete is kind of why it's a sunk cost for them. They're going to push it as hard as they can right now.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
but
absolutely.
also to get they do eventually want ARM to succeed. And I have no problem with that. I just have a problem with them. Like, really? You're not going to give Lunar Lake and AMD Copilot Plus, even though they are? But I don't know how much of that is the software isn't ready for it on Strix right now, which I don't know if it is.
Don't know, but I would say it's much more to do with, whether Microsoft is going to do it rather than whether it can be done. And considering the fun and games with Windows on Granite Ridge desktop, who knows how much of this is down to Microsoft hamstringing certain companies or being a bit too busy to get round to it. Who knows? But no, sadly, the business, because obviously we're all sick and tired of AI, but the business about Microsoft Copilot, and then you have to look double care. What exactly Copilot Plus? You say that's Qualcomm only. It's like, So the really big thing would be if Lunar Lake launches with Copilot Plus now, not at some point. Not Copilot Plus ready, but Copilot Plus now, and yet Strix doesn't have it. If that was to happen, that would be what the heck.
That would be a huge slap in the face. Well, continuing with Lunar Lake, Chris Strick writes in and says, Intel specifically designed Lunar Lake for power efficiency, but how important do you think that is? Would it be your top priority in a laptop? Would you give up on using an OLED screen to get that, as they consume about as much power as the CPU during light workloads compared to using a screen that uses less energy? Should performance testing and battery life testing be done on low power modes?
The low power mode thing, it depends, because the problem is you end up doing, we have this other way with gaming modes, so Razer in particular, but other companies, Asus, they'll have 3 power schemes. I mean, whether it's within Windows power schemes, or whether it's within the, in the case of Asus Armory Crate or whatever Razer calls their software these days, you'll typically have 3 different modes, and sometimes it can be more than that. And you have to be very careful, because the modes don't mean necessarily what you think they mean. And I think I'm right in saying that's what Meteor Lake ran into, so Intel Core Ultra 100, which was the high power mode in Windows, apparently fed more juice to the processor. However, that meant there was less juice for the graphics. So Windows high power mode would actually slow your gaming because it was starving the GPU of power, because Windows was feeding juice to the CPU. So the permutations become almost endless. And when you get beyond a certain point of annoyance with these things, your view becomes, stuff it, I'll leave it on auto and it can do whatever it does. And however it behaves is how it behaves. In terms of, would I sacrifice OLED for a regular panel? It depends. Do you take your laptop outside or not? If you don't take your laptop outside and you haven't got to fight the sun, then a 300 or 400 nit panel under regular lighting is fine. In which case, yes, I'll sacrifice the nice panel because battery life is so important to me. If I can leave a charger at home when I travel, that's great. Like for a week, that's great. But that doesn't happen. That's what Qualcomm now offers. Sadly, the Qualcomm laptops don't tend to run software. The software doesn't tend to work.
Which is kind of square one,
which is quite important. So if we could have the best of both worlds, so if you could have a laptop where when you put it in its sleeve and put it away for, because you might, I use my laptop sporadically. I don't use it regularly. if when I get the thing out, the battery's at the same state it was when I shut it down, not put it to sleep, but actually turn it off, I'd like that, but it's usually flat. If I could travel without a charger, I'd like that.
What's
Obviously,
your laptop? Is it Intel?
Funnily enough, it is, and it's an 11th gen. It's a little Asus ZenBook.
I was just talking to someone who has a Qualcomm laptop at lunch the other day, and I have a Hawkpoint tablet, and he's like, I just love how when I put it to sleep, the battery life is the same as when I wake it up.
Exactly.
And I said that's not a Qualcomm thing. That's a not Intel thing. My Hawkpoint tablet, I fall asleep holding it all the time. I wake up, same battery life. I was shocked. And I asked Wendell about this, who also uses the same tablet as me, the Minis 4 and V3. And he goes, oh yeah, like you put it to sleep for 2 days, it's not going to lose any battery. So I just came from a Comet Lake laptop. So I think don't use Qualcomm after Intel. Use Qualcomm and Hawkpoint. Because Intel advice. Cannot keep the battery life when you turn it off or put it to sleep for some reason.
No, and we wonder why Intel couldn't make a phone. Strange, isn't it? No, if your laptop has a Type-C charging port, so, if all else fails, plug it into the same thing as your phone, and it doesn't take a lot of juice, I'll sacrifice the good screen for...
That's what I was going to say. Is my paradigm after using the Minis 4 and V3 is completely changed on battery life. As long as you give me 6 hours, I actually overclocked it to 45 watts. I don't care. It can have 5 hours. You know why?
Wow.
Because I can plug it into a power bank this big and it will charge in an hour, and I don't care anymore. I don't need to use these big barrel chargers. I do leave my charger at home because I can plug it into an airplane seat and it will charge because it has the capability.
Then that could rejig my thinking.
Because a lot of laptops still don't let you do that, but some of them do now, and that for me is it's a game changer. As long as it can output 15 watts, you can charge it.
Okay, well, once I've experienced that for myself, I might have to take back every word I've just said. For the moment, that's where I'm going with, but it sounds like our experience with Intel is identical. But the business about not just day on battery, but multi-day on battery. But they're putting it to sleep or shutting it down and waking up. It's like, where's the battery gone? I hate that.
I think Linus Tech Tips did a video where they said they are switching to Appleby a few years ago because they were so sick of like an emergency edit to a thumbnail needing to be done. And then one of their people opens the laptop dead, and they're just like, how does this keep happening? I think they did a whole deep dive on it.
Well, there you go. So once again, Intel loses.
Unfortunately, but hopefully that can change with Lunar Lake. I mean, my main concern, and this was something I talked to with Carbon Cry, who's a contributor to Moore's Law is Dead, and a die shrink that came out last week, which was Lunar Lake on paper seems kind of awesome for certain use cases. I mean, it has a graphics card that's maybe close to Strix. Hopefully it can boot all games. And its battery life probably will be better than Strix. But the problem is that they're pretending this is a Strix competitor. It's really not. It's meant to compete with like smaller SoCs and be a premium version of them. But because this is the only AI APU Intel has this year, they're pretending this is like a flagship, even though it only has 4 big cores. And that is where I think there could be a huge handicap, because they were talking about in their Hot Chips presentation on Lunar Lake that Microsoft Teams can run completely contained in the 4 little cores, then everything else can be done on the big cores. I'm like, that might work if you're browsing the web, but if you have even 10 Chrome tabs open, I don't think so. And you mean to tell me Teams takes up half of your cores? Those 4 cores are not going to be running a game at the same time well.
I find it quite sad, but it's legitimate that you're buying a laptop, or your company's buying a laptop, and it's for Teams. Having said that, the business about, this laptop has a 720p camera. The one I've got sitting on top of it's a Logitech 1080p camera. I've forgotten it's a 720 camera. It's like, oh my God, that looks terrible. But the idea of laptops that need competent audio, a reasonable screen, a reasonable camera, and so on and so on and so on. It's and it's all for bloody Teams or Zoom. Do people still use Zoom?
Oh yeah.
but it's a significant market, so therefore fair enough. But the other market that Lunar Lake strikes me as legit for is students, because you want to be able to get the thing out, some notes or whatever it is you do, put the thing away again, and if it's a kilo to a kilo and a half, I'm sure they're going to be in that range, but hopefully closer to a kilo. Great, that's fine. Something that's larger than a phone, because a phone is a great device, but yeah, you don't want to type on your phone, do you? I mean, I know people can, but something larger than that, really. And if that's what it's doing, and if it means is everything's working in a browser, that's legit as well. And the fact it's thin and light, running on Intel-owned graphics rather than adding graphics, that's fine as well. Meteor Lake as an experience was actually fine. It did everything fine. It was just
not
the
better
biggest
than
thing for me was,
the previous gen was the problem.
right, exactly. And the thing was, the battery life was good. The battery life was good, but the samples they handed out to us at the CES briefing was that they were Asus ZenBook 14s, and that's a good chassis. It's which processor you have in it. It's great when it's AMD and it's great when it's Intel.
So I agree that Lunar Lake was probably a good business laptop thing, but is it a better business laptop than Qualcomm? And it's good for students, I suppose. But like, I actually will be curious to see this. Like, AMD is going to be able to market AMD graphics, which everyone regards better than Intel, and 12 cores, not 8 cores. And they're, well, let's not get into what core matters, but it's 12 cores versus 8 cores. I mean, I'm curious how many people you think will actually choose Lunar Lake over AMD if they're the same price, especially because I wouldn't be surprised if some of these Strix laptops come with a 4060 for the same price as a Lunar Lake laptop,
They got totally different market segments. So,
but do you? Because I'm a student, and if I'm a student, I want the 4060 or I want the 12 cores. I don't care if I have 2 more hours of battery life.
if you've got a 1 kilo thin and light that has minimal cooling and it can do good stuff, and you're running everything in browser, because after all, Qualcomm, the big thing for them was when they're saying we now do Chrome properly. They were really making a big song and dance.
Congrats.
We can run Chrome because if your Zoom or whatever call is running in Chrome, then you got support for that. Now, if you end up buying your device just to run Chrome, then the question is, well, how much are you paying for this?
Yeah.
Because those Qualcomms are like $1,000 or $1,500. That's a lot of money to run a browser. To my mind, why don't you get a bloody iPad?
Or get a Hawk Point laptop for $700, half the price.
Exactly. So then you're suddenly in the, are you after it'll do everything? In which case, the Qualcomm not running software is a really big deal. Really big deal. If, on the other hand, it's a relatively dumb, thin client type device, then I want it to be a lot cheaper. Now, I know Qualcomm's just said they're going to have 8-core parts. And
yeah, they have the cheaper models coming soon.
Sure, but I wanted those at launch, and at launch I really wanted like 799, not this 12 to 1500 kind of thing. And in that sense, I think they didn't do a great job on launch. And Qualcomm's launched a lot of products in their time, so I was surprised by that. But maybe Microsoft is pushing for Surface as a premium. Perhaps Microsoft was concerned that cheap laptops from the other makers would undercut Surface. Could have been that.
Oh, I have a theory on this. I think it's because this was the first Copilot Plus PCs, and because of that, Microsoft insisted on them having the best parts. That's my theory.
Okay. That make. I mean, I hate it.
Do you want the first Copilot Plus laptops to be $600 with a 1080p screen? Probably not.
No, Tom. The only Copilot Plus laptops powered by Qualcomm.
They're premium.
God, there's snake oil, isn't it? Okay, so potentially that. Then, to me, a cheap Qualcomm that can do Chrome, but it needs to be cheap, is a perfectly acceptable thing. Lunar Lake, if it's thin and light Intel on Intel, that will be thin, it will be light. It could be cheapish because the Meteor Lake ones, I think, were about 1200. As soon as you slap in proper graphics, you're straight up to 1500, going to $2,000. And they can be a really nice experience because they're still quite thin, but I don't feel the need to game on laptops. Now, here's the thing. After our chap Matt Minot reviewed, I think it was an Asus, but it was the AI 300 Strix laptop, and he liked the laptop. Got a really good review. It's a good laptop. Dominic, who does our graphics reviews at KitGuru, he then took the laptop off Matt, and he just did the IGP, which I think on that model was an 890M.
Mm-hmm.
And
if it's the 370,
takeaway,
I said if it's the 370, then yeah.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, because obviously different SoCs have different IGPs. You have to be a bit cautious. But this would be the high-end one, and it was I think it's the best IGP that they do. But his take on it was it could do far more gaming than he expected. You very often have to drop IQ to either medium or maybe even low settings. Sometimes you have to turn on frame generation, but it games. And he was starting from the point of view of assuming it wouldn't game, and it did. So in a sense, his bar was low, but the point was IGP, it games. End of story. Now, clearly you get a better gaming experience if you ever add in graphics, but if you've got adding graphics, you've got more power, so you've got a thicker laptop, you've got more cooling, you've got more noise.
You also have a shorter lifespan. They break quicker. Everyone tells me that.
Yes, exactly. So you get you get that thing which, and of course it costs more. So you've got the thing of, hang on, do I actually, yes, I want a better gaming experience, but there's a lot to be said for a thin and light with decent integrated graphics. And AMD has definitely got those with RDNA 3. RDNA 4 should be better still. Lunar Lake? Hope's not high. They're putting a big emphasis on graphics, but it's all for AI.
And that's my concern, right? Is I think Lunar Lake costs the same or more to produce than Strix does. And yes, it is the most premium thin and light laptop experience if that's literally all you're going for. But I just feel like if all you're going for is office browsing, you're just going to get a cheaper laptop. No one's paying $1,500 to browse the web. If you want the highest end premium web browsing and it can do gaming with its iGPU, I don't see why someone would go into a store, see 12 cores and 8 cores and choose the 8 core. That's my concern. Is it is an interesting niche, and it's one that actually appeals to me, but I don't think it does to most people. And you say it's for students. I don't know. I was a student. I wanted to have my laptop that could run games because I'm traveling back and forth to college, my parents' house for the holidays. You want, at least I know the guys that buy a gaming laptop. Buy a laptop for school. Almost always want it to be able to run games. So that'd be my concern with Lunar Lake. Is I think it's really interesting, but if it's being pushed into all of these other niches, I don't know, man. People see 12 cores or 10 cores, and I think they go, ooh, bigger number. Fair or not.
And you could very well be correct. And it has to be said, the last gen of AMD laptops was good. The current gen is good. Mm-hmm. They've done good products. I don't know what the mentality is of the man in the street, and the Intel Inside Bingly Bongly adverts and all the rest of it, whether they yet understand AMD even does laptops. But anyone who's tech aware, AMD laptops are a bloody good starting point. And in the past, they weren't. And now they really are.
So, all right, I'd be remiss if we didn't at least touch on this. Compressed AI Blocks and Thalo215 Ryan, I combined their questions. They ask, will Arrow Lake be the next Alder Lake? As in, it's stronger than Zen 5, but people don't care because of what's happened with Intel products lately. For that matter, what are the chances that if Arrow Lake doesn't take off, what are the chances that Arrow Lake might not take off in sales due to apprehension from Raptor Lake failures?
Well, yes. I've already had companies approach. Companies have approached KitGuru to push Z890 motherboards, kind of booking slots, for some weeks ahead. And my advice to them, as the bloke who'll be doing reviews, so speaking to the people talking to the companies, is for the love of God, avoid trying to push $800 Z890 motherboards, because that's what they want to do. They always want to do that. MSI, I am quite certain, will have a Z890 Godlike for $1,500 or $2,000, for example.
I've heard that will probably be true of some X870 Extremes too.
Yeah. I'm certain of it. And the thing is, I really couldn't care. And the reason I couldn't care is because my doubts over the push, even if Arrow Lake is great in some way, it comes to me and I'm just blown away by it. My confidence can't be high. So I can't say to people, this feels really great, you should go and buy it. I'm going to have to couch it, aren't I, as it seems great, but until we've run it for a period of time, how can we know? So I'm obviously trying to think ahead, but it seems to me if Arrow Lake is good, and I don't come across any nasties and the power draw drops and the voltage is sensible and all the rest of it, probably my view would be, on principle, avoid whatever the Core i9 is. Don't go beyond Core i7, maybe Core i5, and therefore go mid-range. Because if you want grunt, 16 cores of Ryzen 9. And therefore, yeah, it feels like a good experience, but it's going to be lots of buts. And are you really going to sink $600 or $700 on the processor and $800 or $900 on the motherboard and all the rest of it, and a Gen 5 SSD? That's $2,000. Nah, it might go up in flames. And of course, there'll be lots of people joking. They'll be putting flames on the thumbnails, and you can see it all coming. So weirdly, the companies who are talking about X870 AMD boards, I'm saying mid-range better, high-end tolerable. Intel, I'm saying for the love of God, stay mid-range. And that's a reverse.
I see, because you don't see anyone gambling with a $1,000 motherboard after the recent issues.
Well, there's that, but it's also the reputational thing, which is, why the heck am I going to say, yes, Intel's mucked up repeatedly, and they're currently potentially at that point fighting lawsuits? Yeah, go for it.
Because the lawsuits are just getting started. By the time Arrow Lake launches, there could be tons of headlines of them being in court or something.
Anything's possible. But the point also is the life of the video. I mean, part of the reason in reviews I don't actually dwell on pricing too much is because, yes, that's true at the time, but the video is going to be there for 5 years.
And those prices will be different in even 6 months.
Oh, absolutely. Everything changes. And you're referring to, you've got cash in your pocket. Of course, you can go and spend it. And then people watch it in the future and go, I'm skint, or vice versa. What do you mean recession? We and so on and so on. So you have to take the time. So when people watch a video of a launch from this October in 2026, when they're looking to buy the part used from their mate, and they're going, buy an Intel, you crazy?
And do you think that sentiment's going to echo across other reviewers? I guess.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah, you think
absolutely.
Perhaps, and I'm not saying literally these people, giving examples, people like Gamers Nexus and Hardware Unboxed, you think every review is going to have a 1-minute part where they're like, hey, it's hard for us to recommend it.
Gamers Nexus did it on his, sorry to cut across, Gamers Nexus did it on his, one of his Ryzen 9000 reviews. He said, I've looked everywhere on the box, and the good news is I can't find the word Intel.
Right. Yeah.
And it was like, and the point being it was clearly entirely unnecessary for an AMD review. Quite funny. But the fact that Intel is the butt of jokes, there you go. So, and the point being is, for the rest of this year, which is the period of time immediately that we're talking about, I mean, it's the next quarter, really, I don't anticipate things getting better for Intel. I anticipate things, they're going to be firing all those people. It's only going to be bad headlines. Their next financials aren't going to improve. I mean, they got nothing good
I don't think
coming.
So.
No. And then after that, Nvidia will presumably launch Blackwell and thing. So they've got multiple quarters of bad news. So no, I'm not going to kick them unjustifiably. But how can I get behind them?
All right. Well, speaking of quarters of bad news, the final thing I want to talk to you about is I recently put out that leak about basically Jim Keller's Royal Core project being just gone, dead in the water, canceled. Worse than I initially reported, which I initially reported that it sounded bad. Now it sounds worse than I thought it was. The one caveat I will say is I have received this is storing up quite a hornet's nest within Intel, and I've received more. There is another side of this story where some people think maybe Pat made the right decision, is all I can say for now. I won't say that I necessarily agree with them because I have multiple people making, I think, compelling arguments on the other side. But I think at a minimum, the fact that the much hyped up Jim Keller project is dead alone doesn't look good. And I'm wondering what you think about this reporting that the Royal Core project's dead, and how are you feeling about the future of Intel right now?
So the Jim Keller thing, the bigger news really was the fact that he, in essence, appeared to be driven to leave Intel 2 years into a 5-year deal. That was, in essence, what you were saying. So if Keller goes kind of, I don't need this shit, I'm out of here, that's not good. The project itself and the various stages sounded interesting. I think in a way, however, you put your finger on it, because you, towards the end of your, when you're talking about the version 2.0, you said something like, doesn't that sound great for gamers? And it did. The thing is, I'm not sure that gamers are where any of these companies think they're going to make their money.
Well, I think it would have been great for other things as well. And just to make sure people know what we're talking about, right? Like, the idea was they were moving towards Beast Lake next. So what comes after Beast Lake, which Beast Lake came after Nova Lake. Nova Lake comes after Arrow Lake. Beast Lake next was supposedly going to be 6P, no E-cores, but each P-core could divide into 4 cores dynamically, meaning if you're browsing the web, maybe you just have 2 P-cores on, and then one of the cores divided into 4, 2 plus 4, immense power savings for laptops. Or if you're in server, you could have 64 cores. And if you're, people are like remoting in to do virtual CAD work or managing a website, low traffic, guess what? Everyone gets these crazy low latency fast cores. It's a fast experience. And then server gets overloaded. Boom. 64 cores is now 256 cores dynamically. So I think there's profound benefits to this for laptop, desktop, yes, probably gaming and server. I don't think it was just about that gaming, though. I think this could have been a revolutionary architecture.
It certainly sounded revolutionary, and obviously, therefore, by definition, novel and interesting. The thing was, because it's the dynamic nature, and therefore there must be an overhead, and therefore the question has to be, how does it compare to fixed function? Because later this year, I think it's still this year, both AMD and Intel on the server side of things are going to be doing chips that have loads of big cores, and this one will have loads of little cores. And they presumably have decided we're going to have, what's it does it, 256 of the little cores on one of the epics?
So that's Turin. Turin is 192, but they're not little cores. They're just Zen 5C.
No, but there's also the version, like Intel has the Sierra Forest. I thought there's a version of Epic.
That's Turin. Before you would have called it Bergamo versus Genoa, but they're just not changing the name now. So 3 nanometer Zen 5, that's Zen 5C Turin. So there's 192 3 nanometer cores, and they have hyperthreading, and they go to 4 gigahertz or probably 3 gigahertz. That's it.
I thought there were 2 versions. I thought there's a version that had big cores and a version that had little cores.
There are 2 versions, but they're both big cores, right? Because the E cores with Intel don't even have hyperthreading. They're truly weaker than the P cores.
No, understood about that. But with that, you see, with the servers, I can understand that they're going, right, it's fixed function. And then they also run into the fun and games with because you get server chips that have loads of cores that run quite low speed even when they don't need to, because that way for the cloud the customers don't get disappointed when sometimes the chips run fast and other times they run slow depending on load. So in essence, they're leaving performance on the table when the chips are lightly loaded, because they want to guarantee you always get a certain amount of performance. It doesn't vary, even though it could. And in a way, it sounded like the Keller thing, because it's so dynamic. From the server point of view, if that's where it's being used, you don't know minute to minute what you're going to get from the thing. It could be a highly variable level of performance. Now, from our point of view on the desktop, that's bloody brilliant. And in a laptop, if you've got essentially go for it mode or no power mode, that's brilliant. From the server point of view, I don't know if that's a good thing or not. The other thing is, I'd love to know how with dynamic core allocation, how they'd handle software licensing, which is something that doesn't affect us on the desktop in the slightest.
It's arbitrary crap, though, that we have to deal with that.
Absolutely. But for server guys, I mean, companies like Salesforce have made their, an Oracle.
Oh, maybe it could be a way to cheat the system. Maybe you could say, no, we're only licensing 64 cores. And then...
Right. So the thing is that it's a technology that in principle could be used for everything up in a certain range, not phones or tablets probably, but it could be used for an awful lot of things. And yet in practice, I wonder. And I wonder what the overhead, and it's something we'll never know, sadly. What's the overhead for all this dynamic behavior? Would you actually have to limit the range of dynamic behavior in certain applications? Because otherwise it's doing so much work switching modes, because it almost sounds like one of the Terminators, liquid metal ones that change shape. Right now I'm a racing car with 2 cores that go at 9 gigahertz. Now I'm a 16 core that goes at 3 gigahertz.
And I don't know if this is true. I'm making this up. No one told me this, but I have no idea if it could have gone to 2 medium-sized cores, divided by 2. Who knows? I don't know.
But the principle essentially of a bag of dynamic processing, in principle, I love it. Now, there's no possibility that Keller came up with a bad idea. The question, therefore, would have to be, assuming it could be delivered on, from your reporting it was being delivered on, it would have been a thing. Therefore, the question would be, who ultimately would be the customers? And it's perfectly possible that that question in turn becomes, is it or is it not suitable for AI? And that's the question. In the same way as AMD Instinct, MI300, 325, 350, then 400. That's where we're going to make the money. Epic is a thing. Oh, Granite Ridge. Well, I guess we can make some desktop processors. Yeah. We're seeing things through our own lens. But the fact it's been cancelled seems desperately upsetting to me, because they're always projecting years ahead with these things. Well, a 5-year
That's
project,
the biggest concern for me, right? So what comes after Nova Lake then? I mean, what the heck?
Right. There we go. So now the other thing is, in your reporting and in various comments on it and other things, the one thing I will point out is questions such as the future of Intel. I think people need to start getting in the habit of specifying, do they mean Intel products or Intel Foundry? Because Intel's now split the company in 2, and there's talk of spinning off, the Foundry as a separate company.
Mad Nullis Ragkusis writes in and says, hello, Leo and Tom. What do you think about the recent rumors of Intel trying to sell off their fabs? Can Intel successfully become a fabless company, or will this be the start of the end?
Well, you see, now when I was on, as it turns out, a year ago, it seemed to me back then, this is before the money for the Chips for America Act has started to flow, and obviously before this election for you chaps have become such an imminent thing, that it's the foundry that America can't allow to go bust, because America needs to be able to make chips.
See, I disagree on that.
Fair enough, but give it both of your current candidates. Can we put, so that's 1st of September, because things might change. But both of your candidates.
Who knows? It'll just be a different one again. Go on, yeah.
True enough. In that case, both your current candidates and whoever the candidates are in a few weeks' time are both heavily in favor of rebuilding America, made in America, jobs for America, and all the rest of it. I am, and also money for, in this case, Chips for America Act. I cannot imagine Intel Foundry services being allowed to close. I cannot imagine that.
Well, I don't think that's what the question is. It's just if they spin off their fabs. And I think in doing so, I know that Samsung, I'm told, is in, I think it's Austin, the Austin, Phoenix areas, which I know they're not right next to each other, people, but there's, Samsung's building these fabs and they're poaching Intel Foundry people like crazy. So I don't see why Samsung couldn't buy an Intel fab. The problem is I don't think Samsung wants an Intel fab. So
that could very well be the case, but I think because America wants to be able to make chips and buy them from American companies. I think it's as simple
there's
as
nothing
that.
more American than a South Korean company.
Very true. And you exported baseball quite admirably. We'll see on this one. I might be entirely wrong. I would. So 5 years ago, when the question was, "Is Intel in trouble?" Nah, they'll be fine. They're a huge company. Now, obviously, that view has completely changed. I would say now that Intel products could conceivably fold.
Right.
If Intel products was to fold, I would be shaken, but not shocked. If Intel Foundry was to fold, then I would be truly surprised from the strategic point of view for America. And the thing is, I cannot believe that America can allow everything with the name Intel to cease to exist. So therefore, of Intel Foundry or Intel products, which one is the one that America is going to ensure cannot fail? And
I
of
think
the
the
two,
fabs. Yeah.
right. So therefore, products may fold, but Foundry cannot fold.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, the Foundry is the one. So when Intel's spinning off the Foundry, Intel Foundry services, I don't think that's exactly the right view. I think it's more, it'll be the Foundry that gets the lifeboat on the Titanic.
It'll be the Foundry that spins off
And the
Intel
product
Design.
people might be the band playing the tune as they sink beneath the waves, potentially. Because the strategic point of view, I cannot believe there won't be the Intel name around for a few more years, and therefore it'll be the Foundry. I think the German fab and the Polish packaging plant, I personally think, are toast.
And I think they said they're not going to do the Italian one, or there's something going on in Italy as well.
There was talk about some other center. There was talk about an R&D center in France. I think they're all toast. I think the EU, I think, is not going to pay tens of billions for Intel to build some white elephants in Europe, and America wants them in America. The Israeli fabs, I'm not sure what the state of play is with the new one. Obviously, Israel's got all sorts of problems at the moment. The Irish fab has just got EUV, and that's the thing. The next thing on from that is high-NA EUV, and if that works, I mean, there's always talk, isn't there, about the new machines. One has gone to Intel, one's gone to presumably TSMC now. As far as I'm aware, high-NA EUV doesn't work, and I don't know if it ever will work. EUV took a long time to work, and the changes for high-NA strike me as highly questionable. And you're welcome to put your views below this if you think I'm being incredibly negative. So I think I think Intel is likely to to pull back to the motherland, and I think it is the foundry services that are the core that America will want to keep on. But it's going to be huge changes, and seeing how that's going to work out, that's beyond my comprehension, because that's a massive change in my lifetime. Massive.
You know, one thing I'd throw at you is something I bring up a lot. I wouldn't be surprised if I brought it up last time you were on. Is, during World War II, the Jeep was invented by some chaps. It's really a startup that came up with the American Jeep. And then they said, thanks for the design. I'm sorry to tell you this, but now GM and Ford will be manufacturing, and Chrysler will be manufacturing all of them. Too bad. We need to win a war. And I just can't help but think that at the end of the day, you look at the Department of Defense contract that was supposed to go to Intel. They withdrew it. From what I heard, it's because they didn't like what they saw. They felt like they were just bailing Intel out a little bit there. You see the increased spending, billions, like there's like $8 billion to TSMC, to Samsung in the United States. It's starting to feel like the US government is actually now kind of playing the field and looking around and going, oh, maybe we don't need Intel. And if we do need them to make something, whatever, they'll make AMD CPUs just like Chrysler made Jeeps. I guess now still kind of does.
8 billion. I mean, at the moment, fabs are costing about 10 billion a piece. Sure. So 8 billion is not a whole fab. You're at that level of magnitude, which is why the German fab Magdeburg, I personally think, was questionable from the start, and I'm sure is toast, is because that was the largest piece of infrastructure Germany would have ever, or the single single largest piece of infrastructure that by a foreign company that Germany had been sinking loads into. There's some sort of wording, because I'm sure their railways and their roads cost more than that. But it's a lot of money. And when you have to come up with this lot of money for one building full of a lot of equipment, it's like, So we'll see. But there's no doubt America will have a lot of fabs. They clearly have Intel fabs. They clearly will have Samsung. They clearly will have TSMC. We'll see how that goes. And clearly, in a sense, Taiwan is playing both sides by slow rolling, building TSMC fabs in America just to keep America on side. Yes, we're still friends. But clearly their insurance is the fabs in Taiwan.
And the final argument I think I could make for kind of what I'm suggesting as well is, you look like at American small arms for the U.S. military, and it's like they don't care if Winchester makes the rifles American soldiers use or the pistols. They'll let Beretta make the M9 for U.S. soldiers, but you got to manufacture it in the U.S. I just don't see why that would be any different for Taiwan or South Korea, because
the big thing at the minute, the big thing at the moment is that Intel, their fabs can make chips for Intel because all the I can't remember the model things they use. The instructions essentially that they work on are for Intel. They're not industry standard. So Intel can have chips made at TSMC, but Intel currently can only just or is about to be able to make chips for other companies. Then they're not making them to industry standard. That's what they need to fix. Mm-hmm. If they can change that, then they're cooking. Until they change that, they're in deep trouble. But it's a radical change for Intel. They're very, very slow to the party on this one. I mean, it's just painful to watch. It's taken them so long to turn things around. Well, they haven't yet turned things around. And when you consider the pantomime over the part, what was it, 5 nodes in 4 years, and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. We've got
who cares what TSMC did? 7, 6, 5, 4, and 3. So I can pretend TSMC did 5 nodes in 4 years as well. What are you going to call a node? Come on, man.
Well, right, and the thing also is that when because Gelsinger was clearly, I'm sure his career depends upon it. If I can deliver 5 nodes in 4 years, that means I'm doing good. Therefore, he's got 4 years. So you
only
can't
if someone's actually building things on those nodes, I would suggest too.
Well, right, but also each of the of the current nodes, and it's apparently 18A that's going to be the one, because it's always the next one that's the big one. 18A is the one that's going to do all this clever stuff with through power vias and backside power delivery and the nano wires, the gate all round transistors. They're bringing in an awful lot of new technologies on node at the same time as they're trying to bring out new nodes at a really fast rate. Mm-hmm. That's an awful lot of things they have to do simultaneously. And historically, that's not gone well for Intel. Perhaps they'll deliver it. Perhaps 18A will be bloody brilliant. Mm-hmm. But then they need products. So, yeah, it's a grisly situation. Gelsinger, I was totally on board when Gelsinger returned to the company, and a lot of people in Intel seem to be very happy
Everyone
he was there.
Yeah.
We're getting rid of the accountants. We've got an engineer back. But I think the world has changed. The people running Apple and Nvidia are not the same as the people at Intel. They're just not. Mm-hmm. And those are the companies that are doing stunningly well. It's a real shame. But Intel does seem to have missed a great many boats. And the whole AI thing has just been catastrophic.
So I think this is the perfect lead into the final question here. Batty251 writes and says, "Hey, Leo, what do you think the next 5 years will look like for AMD, Intel, and Qualcomm? Do you think Qualcomm could emerge as a significant player in the consumer desktop market and potentially replace Intel? Thank you." So I want to answer that last part myself. Qualcomm's going to be a player in laptop over the next few years, I think. But more likely, I think NVIDIA's waiting for Qualcomm to get Windows working with ARM, and then NVIDIA will make ARM chips for desktop. That's my prediction on that one, though.
Perfectly possible. I mean, after all, the Grace Hopper, part of that is a processor. So Nvidia is already in ARM. Of course, Intel was in ARM years ago, and they had strong ARM. That was Intel products. In a sense, an awful lot of people would be satisfied by a product that was the equivalent of a smartphone, where you could just kind of stretch it and make it a bit bigger when you wanted a bigger screen, then stretch it back down again. So the fold type Galaxy or Pixel provided it was thinner and less expensive, would satisfy an awful lot of people. AMD has done very well. They should continue doing well with Epic, and they have AI graphics. And even if AI ceases to be such a big thing, even soon, there'll be other functions for that. I think AMD should be fine. But the question with AMD would be, do they need to do ARM or not? Because I don't think AMD has any ARM at all.
So I leaked that there's this APU they're working on called Soundwave, and that's supposed to come out in 2 years, and it's ARM. So They are developing one. But again, I think it's kind of like NVIDIA. Like AMD's not rushing to make ARM. They're waiting for ARM to actually work on Windows, and then they'll launch it in 2026 or something.
Right. So that is clearly a toe in the water and not much more than that. So unless the world suddenly switches to ARM at a huge pace, then they should be fine. And they've got the cover of a variety of products, but they aren't in phones. I know they did a thing, didn't they? Their graphics were in a phone briefly, but ARM killed all that. So they're not in phones. And the number of phones, everybody has a phone, so it is important. Intel, I just see endless bad news. I cannot see.
Really, that you think just nothing but bad news for the next 5 years?
I don't see what is coming that makes me think hooray. Because sadly, on the server side of things, Epic has destroyed them. Just destroyed them over time. It's taken a chunk of market share for one thing, but it's destroyed average selling prices. In a sense, what they did to high-end desktop, i.e. high-end desktop is no longer a thing. That's obviously a small business and a niche business, and it's one that only we care about. Most people, your neighbors never even heard of it. But in a sense, they've done that because it used to be a time when some Xeon sold for $20,000 a piece.
Yep.
And that's not a thing anymore. And as a result, they have margins. The trouble Intel's had is they had high costs but high margins. They got high costs. They don't have the margins, and that's catastrophic. They aren't in phones. They have a whole range of other technologies. But for example, Thunderbolt, to take something at random. Okay. But, how many people work on Thunderbolt? It's going to be some non-zero number of people that's got a cost attached. What do they get out of it? It's a USB-C port. Okay, it's a clever port, but you know what? Their graphics continue to be not great. Not awful, but not great. They're not in consoles. They're not in phones. Their supercomputer with Sapphire Rapids and Ponte Vecchio graphics, I mean, I take it exists, but that's
about all that it does do is exist,
right? And what of it? And I bet the people that bought it are a bit upset, and on and on and on. So it's like, holy God! So I think that's why I say about the foundry services is the thing they have is they're American. You can't take that away from them. They are American. And I think if you're actually looking around desperately for points of just separation, it's like, but yeah, we're American. We've still got that. So provided you chaps don't get invaded anytime soon, I think they'll be clinging on to that.
Else.
Well, right. And then Nvidia has, in my time, been on the verge of going bust a number of times, and they've been on a very rocky road, and they'll talk a good game and then something goes bad, and yet they go from near catastrophe to near catastrophe, but they go from success to success to success.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't see this 1, then 2, then 3 trillion market cap coming, not by a long shot.
No. Well, if we did, we would have bought stocks. Yeah.
Precisely. So the fact that we're talking to each other now proves that we didn't have the inside track on this. So there's that.
Yeah, that we're not on a beach somewhere, sure.
Right. But there's also the thing that Nvidia is going to continue being Nvidia as long as Jensen Huang is Jensen Huang. And the minute Jensen Huang is not Jensen Huang, that, as far as I'm concerned, that's pretty much the end for Nvidia the day after. Yeah, it'll be a slide, but without Jensen, it's not Nvidia. So I don't know how much longer the man's got.
People at Nvidia say that too. They say they don't know what they would do without him.
Yes. So Jensen has now turned 60, I believe. And therefore he's only got a certain number of years left. But I mean, Warren Buffett is about 100, isn't he?
True. So, he's still making great decisions, so it depends on the person. We don't know. So
it is conceivable he's looking at anything 20, 30, 40 years, conceivably, which would, that's forever. So, who knows? But so I'm quite confident that Nvidia will continue to do extraordinary things because of Jensen Huang. I haven't got a clue what the next thing will be. I'm certain that the AI thing will pop, as you are. I don't know when, but he'll have something else after, because the man makes the weather. It's the most extraordinary thing. And sadly, I think one of your questions was about Gelsinger's future. I have to assume if Intel Products fails, that Gelsinger fails. I think even though he's an engineer, so he could probably claim some credit for Foundry. I imagine it one of those things which is that if Intel has to make some truly dramatic changes, and they are making dramatic changes, once those changes have been made, then that would be the time typically that the boss's goose is cooked. Because now we're a new company, we need a new boss. Once you either are the person that makes the changes, or you're the person that's steady as she goes. And if they're making the changes, then they'll need someone to do steady as she goes, I suspect. So I suspect Gelsinger's goose is cooked. In a bit.
If I might summarize then what I believe you basically said, you would say AMD, all evidence is they'll continue to grow and be successful, but they'll be constrained if they can't get into better competition in AI or into smartphones or something. And Nvidia is fine as long as Jensen's fine, and that Intel, you just don't really see the light at the end of the tunnel right now.
No, I don't for Intel, other than they are American. Therefore, if they can do
so there is a light, we just don't know how big it is. Right.
Yeah, but as I think I may have alluded a year ago, sadly, the more grim the world gets, the more important that makes Intel for America, in my view, which is a nasty state of affairs. But it suggests that Intel has been very, quite deliberately a global company for 50 years. And I wonder if that is coming to an end. I wonder if they're going to pull back to the homeland more and more. But it's huge changes happening, and as I say, at the minute, I cannot see light at the end of the tunnel for them. And Qualcomm, yes, I'm quite sure that Qualcomm can get into more devices. They would appear to be Microsoft's new best friend.
Yeah.
For better or for worse.
Yeah, we'll see how long that lasts. I think Microsoft is... I don't trust Microsoft. I advise people not to trust Microsoft.
Are you suggesting they'll be loyal as long as the money rolls?
Exactly. And it's not right now, so I think they have to give it a freshman try, with what they've expended. I've heard ridiculous amounts of money that they've used to help fund Qualcomm's Xelate. But, as I got a new phone coming soon. I was like looking at its performance and I was like, wow, that's good. I'm like, wait, doesn't that almost sound like the X Elite? And it's like, the X Elite is like 50% better specs than, it's just a 50% bigger version of their latest smartphone chips, basically. And it's 30% better, you know? I mean, it's like, it's not really that impressive to me. They just made a bigger smartphone chip, but, you know.
And it runs some Windows.
Yeah, runs on Windows, yes. All right. Well, I think that's a good note to end this episode on. I mean, I can't thank you for coming on enough. Please plug your stuff.
Excellent. So kitguru.net on the web, KitGuru Tech on YouTube, and we're KitGuru on TikTok.
All right. And of course, this is Broken Silicon. Subscribe, comment below. Share this video, subscribe to Broken Silicon on your podcast app of choice. You know, make sure you are, I kind of fumbled saying that, subscribe to the Moore's Law Dead YouTube channel, consider joining the Patreon to ask great guests like this questions and get all types of other content. And yeah, so yeah, thank you everybody for watching. Thank you for listening, and have a good week, everybody. This podcast was brought to you by the YouTube channel and website Moore's Law is Dead. Moore's Law is Dead and Broken Silicon are trademarks of their creator, Tom. That guy is me, and I am indeed the creator, editor, writer, and showrunner of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, videos, articles, and other media. However, it's not just me. Moore's Law is Dead is a team, with Broken Silicon co-hosted by my brother Dan, audio editing by Gerard Cortez, renders being done by the industrial designer Jean-Philippe Clermont, and special assistance is also provided by Carmen Cry and Carrie Nosugad as well. Find all of our information at www.mooreslawsdead.com on the About/Support page. In the event you do want to hire me for consulting work, hire Gerard for audio work, hire Jean-Philippe for industrial design work, or you're interested in working with Carbon Cry or Carrie Nosugada as well. You can also find our long-term sponsors on that page if you want to show them some love for putting food on our tables. Or you can also mail us some love. You can send letters or hardware donations to the following address: Moore's Law is Dead, P.O. Box 60632 in Nashville, Tennessee, zip code 37206. Although, to be honest, the best way to show Moore's Law is Dead some love is to support us on Patreon. Patrons are what makes Moore's Law is Dead content truly possible. Every month, and really every day, depending on who you're talking about, me, Gerard, Dan, and Jean-Philippe are working tirelessly to provide a steady stream of content that we could not keep doing unless we knew the work was possible without being reliant on sponsors dictating every little thing we put out. Don't get us wrong, we love our sponsors, but we love directly working for you, our fans, much more. If you have any extra money, even a couple free dollars a month, consider supporting us directly on Patreon. Those couple of monthly dollars will get you access to the exclusive podcast Die Shrink, voting on subjects of future podcast episodes, the ability to ask guest questions, and of course, access to the Moore's Law is Dead Discord full of like-minded people who I am sure would love to meet you. I am one of them. Additionally, higher tiers get access to early, ad-free episodes of Broken Silicon, the ability to ask questions in all Broken Silicon episodes and Loose Ends live streams ahead of the recording, and the entire back catalog of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, in addition to having thanks in the credits of videos and podcasts depending on the tier, with other perks available as well. And hey, if you cannot afford to support us directly every month, please do share Moore's Law is Dead videos and podcasts with friends and family, and on social media and websites like Reddit, and give Broken Silicon a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast app of choice. All of this does really help us so much. But like I said, this podcast would not be possible without the patrons directly providing predictable and reliable support every month. And so now it is time to give a personal thanks to the greatest of the fans. The following supporters are at the 10 gigahertz or higher supported levels: Brad Medlin, Drita Foles, Z-Jits, Daniel D, Aaron Close, Deke, Jan Rauner, Nicholas Buckner, Daniel High, GZ Ziggy, MJB1, SNES Chalmers, Jim Ferriero, Valcom Alev, Jensen Wang, Gregory S. Hacker, Sarcastro, Toka, Chris Rich, Compressed AI Blocks, 3DS Boy 08, Halbuma, Shredbird, Holden Mobley, Sammy Malas, Jordan Simkovic, Julian Leak, The Boss Haas, Jonathan, Franco Frederic, Jake Dude 23, Jake Martin, Slicky, Christopher A. Butler, Stephen Hart, Meat and Pork, Tim Robb, Ian Clifford, Nithra Zink, Travis Gooding, Mad, Zoot Suit Taylor, Stephen Coates, Greg, Michael McGee, Patty Case, Gamers Unite, Amiable Chief, Mark Mitchell, Tommy, Aishan, Mark Raidmaker, James Anderson, Cole Addict, Cameron, Henry Zhang, Wesley Sager, D31337 Antics, Michelle Pell, Jamie Witters, Hexapuma, Reginald Ari, Teak, Autumn, Jeff Sedler, Winstar, Corey Leonard, James I. Raider, JSMMH, Little Germany, Shay, Milton, Winwang, Melodic Warrior, Brett Jones, Chuck Glidden, Mac Daffy, Stephen Dick, Dave Schultz, Austin Haggerty, Justin Bussell, Joe Foot, Brian Scanlon, Hardland, Jensen Angima, Joseph Kelly, Slushby, Him Sagung, Meal Val, Verga, Sisyphos 7771, The Forbidden Juice, RB Racer, Brian Wright, Gian Violi, AC, Alex Vega, Freedy, Michael Cozy, John Swin, Crystal Joe, Elbergun, Jolo Martina, Keekum, Solarized 80, Jeffrey Jenneman, Matthew Marlowe, Thalo215, Lord Starscream, Brian P, Hoodat42, Sprutnik, Cornster 671, Penta Winter, Rowan McKickey, Angel Cake, Omega Doge, Mr. Tiger, John Wick Boomstick, Porcelain Oats, Curry King 3, Nick Suzmania, Sakosha, I Valens, and of course, thank you to Sahara for the music.